Good morning, everybody. I will call this joint meeting of the Senate and Assembly Judiciary Committees to order on May 22nd of 2021. Would the Secretary please take the roll?
Vice Chair Cannizzaro.
Here.
Senator Orenshaw.
Here.
Senator Harris. Here. Senator Settlemyre. Here. Senator Hansen. Here. Senator Pickard.
Here.
Chair Scheibel.
Here.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. Here. Assemblywoman Cohen. Here. Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Here. Assemblywoman Hansen. Here. Assemblywoman Hardy. Here. Assemblywoman Kasama. Here. Assemblywoman Krasner. Here. Assemblywoman Marzola. Here. Assemblyman Miller.
President.
Assemblywoman Nguyen. Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Orentlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
I believe she's on her way. If you'd please mark her present when she arrives.
Assemblyman Wheeler. Here. Chairman Yeager.
Thank you so much. With that, we do have a quorum, and today we are here to hear one bill. I'm sure you all know that it is Senate Bill 452, and I want to give you a little bit of the lay of the land as we get started. We are going to hear the bill in joint session. I will give the presenters ample time to present the bill, and there is an amendment on Nellis that they will also be presenting to us. The members of both committees, which I will heretofore refer to as the committee because we are now one committee, will have as much time to ask questions as they need. Each person, though, will only get one bite at the apple. So if you think of another question after you've already had your turn to ask questions, you will be asked to follow up offline with the sponsors or whoever you need to ask the questions of. Likewise, if any of the questions become excessive or redundant, I will ask you to follow up offline because we do have not only this meeting to get through, we have other meetings going on in the building today, and we do have a rather large committee when we are combined. So after every member gets a chance to ask any questions that they might have, we will move to testimony on the bill. Testimony will be taken in the normal order, first in support, then in opposition, then in neutral. We will have people in person testify first and then by phone. Each person will be limited to 2 minutes in their testimony, and I will cut you off even if you're in the middle of a sentence because it is the only way I know to be fair. I also encourage you to simply say you agree with previous testifiers, that you are in the same position. That helps us to get through more people, and I understand that if you're not used to testifying, it may seem like you're not giving us your all, but truly we appreciate it, and we do understand when you say something as simple as I agree, that we register that as your support. We will limit testimony in each position to 1 hour. My goal is to get us all out of here by noon, and so I will be keeping track of that and announcing it as we go through. I want to remind everybody in a contentious hearing like this may become to be respectful and civil. Keep your comments to the policy questions and concerns. Again, I will cut you off if you violate that request. And finally, I want to let you know that we all have our computers out, and I hope you don't see it as a sign of disrespect. It is how we access our bills and other information. And after the end of the hearing, the committee will go into a recess. During that recess, we will excuse the members of the Assembly. Though we enjoy their company, they do not have the bill yet in their house, so they cannot yet work session the bill. The Senate, on the other hand, may be ready to work session the bill at the end of the hearing. You might have noticed that a work session was previously scheduled as a separate meeting, but we have since confirmed that we are able to simply work session the bill as a Senate committee within this meeting after the hearing. So if we have that work session, after the work session, we will go to public comment. Public comment will also be limited to 2 minutes per person and to 30 minutes total. And public comment is not a time to continue testimony on the bill. It is a time to make remarks on other issues of importance to the judiciary. And after that, we will conclude. And so I will turn it over to my co-chair, Assemblymember Yeager, to make any remarks that he has, and then we will get started.
Thank you so much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I just wanted to let members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee know and members of the public know that we're hearing this bill in joint hearing because I do not intend to have a separate hearing on the bill in the Assembly if the bill is to come over to us. So I wanted to let everybody know that, and as Chair Scheibel mentioned, we are not able to take any action on the bill in the Assembly because we don't yet have it, but I wanted to make clear for the members of the Assembly that this will likely be your one and only chance to ask questions on this measure, so I would encourage you to ask questions if you have them, and just wanted to let you know that this will be the Assembly hearing as well. So thank you so much, Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will open up the hearing on SB 452.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, members of the Assembly and Senate Judiciary Committees. For the record, my name is Nicole Cannizzaro, and I represent Senate District 6, which is located in the northwest portion of the Las Vegas Valley. And I'm pleased to be here today to present for your consideration Senate Bill 452, which prohibits a person from possessing a firearm on specified premises in certain circumstances. With your permission, Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, I would like to provide just a very brief introduction of the bill, and then would like to turn some of my time over to my co-presenters. I do have with me attending virtually Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts, and of course, Assemblywoman Sandra Jauregui to explain more of the background and details of the bill. We also have with us today Senator Fabian Doñate, who is here to help walk through some of the proposed amended version of the bill that has been provided on Nellis as well. As by way of background information, over the last year, our state, of course, has been deeply impacted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the hospitality industry has been hit especially hard. As we begin to turn the corner and start to make our comeback, we must ensure that our world-renowned resorts are safe for everyone. Our resorts corridor will thrive when our locals are coming back to enjoy a night out, or our out-of-state and international visitors are here in record numbers for vacations, and our hospitality workers have a safe environment to provide the world-class experience that we are so famous for. What we've also learned during the pandemic is that we have to be ready to adapt to changing circumstances. In the last year, we've worked to allow the hospitality industry to function safely in the face of a public health crisis by mandating masks, instituting social distancing, and deploying vaccine units on properties across Nevada. These are just some of the steps that we've been able to take to ensure not only the safety of those who are visiting, but also the safety of those workers who keep this state running each and every day. With Senate Bill 452, we are again looking to adapt our state's legal tools to better protect our hospitality workers and our visitors and guests that travel to Las Vegas from around the world, this time by ensuring that we can appropriately prevent instances where physical violence may otherwise be a factor. When we look at federal and other states' gun-free zone legislation that has been passed in recent years, the intent of this kind of legislation is very clear. These measures are supported by those who hope not only to reduce violent crime, but also to reduce suicides, unintentional firearm injuries and deaths, and mass shootings. A gun-free zone can reduce the presence of guns in these areas, thereby eliminating the risk of unintentional firearm injuries due to recklessness, escalatory conflicts, or criminal activity. What Senate Bill 452 does is allows a business owner or operator with a non-restricted gaming license to post a public notice to visitors or patrons that firearms are prohibited on the premises. Private businesses already have the ability to prohibit firearms on their premises. That is something that they may already do, and we are trying to seek to make sure that that is something that they can properly enforce. Again, I would also note that while this is something that they can already do, this is also something that is a choice for that particular premises owner. This language simply enhances the business community's toolkit to notify patrons of this prohibition and to call upon law enforcement to assist and address situations before they escalate and become dangerous. I would also like to point out that businesses have the option, again, to allow any exemptions from firearm prohibitions, including, but not limited to, law enforcement and security personnel, certain hotel guests, and attendees of trade shows that feature firearms, which of course are a vital part of our economy as well. As you can see that there is a flexibility that is designed to be built into this bill so that it does work to not only ensure the safety of those patrons within these facilities, but also the employees who work there, while at the same time respecting the rights that we know are so important to those who have them. Here with me today, and I would like to invite him up, Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, is Senator Doñate to walk through an amendment for the bill, and then we would like to turn it over to Assemblywoman Sandra Howdege. You can take my seat.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, and good morning to the members of the Joint Senate and Assembly Committees on Judiciary. For the record, my name is Fabian Doñate, and I represent Senate District 10 in Central and East Las Vegas. Senate District 10 covers UNLV, McCarran Airport, parts of East Las Vegas, and the majority of the Las Vegas Strip. I come before you today not just as your fellow colleague, but as the proud son, grandson, nephew, and cousin of casino workers. My family members have worked in the hospitality industry for many years, and it has provided us with the opportunity to pursue the American dream. For me, one of my biggest priorities is to ensure the health and safety of my family members and my community. That means passing policies that will enhance the protections offered to our fellow casino workers. Let me be clear with one thing today. The epidemic of gun violence is a public health crisis. We need to do everything we can to prevent the acts of violence before catastrophe occurs. After witnessing the horror and pains that resulted from the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting, it is clear to me that more must be done to ensure that our visitors, casino workers, and local residents are further protected. Which brings me to Senate Bill 452. After speaking with various stakeholders and community members, I am offering this friendly amendment that will help clarify a lot of the concerns that we are seeing with the original language. Under my proposed amendment, Senate Bill 452 will take the same approach that we have already established within NRS regarding public buildings and schools. If an organization like a casino on the Las Vegas Strip opts to enact this policy to limit the presence of firearms on their premises, certain requirements must be met to enact this new regulation. This amendment strengthens the bill requirements with regards to signage and makes these signs required at every casino entrance, check-in desk, and cashier's cage. Additionally, it also changes the penalties associated with any violations of this policy down to a gross misdemeanor, which is a similar language that is reflected in NRS 202.265 that prevents the possession of a weapon on a school premise. Lastly, this amendment requires that any covered premises that are documented in this legislation must set policies and procedures that will require the training of security guards on de-escalation techniques, cultural diversity, competency, and implicit bias. I want to thank Majority Leader Canizaro for trusting me in this process and allowing me the opportunity to co-present with her today, and I hope this amendment brings us closer to preventing an act of gun violence before it's too late to do so. And Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, at this time, I'll turn it to Assemblywoman Howdege.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning, Chair Scheibel, Chair Yeager, and members of the Judiciary. For the record, I am Sandra Howdege, representing Assembly District 41, and I'm happy to be here alongside Majority Leader Canizaro to have the conversation about what it takes to keep Nevada safe. I'm proud that we are continuing the conversation on this policy that we began to work on over a year ago with the stakeholders here. Many of you have heard my story multiple times, and I will continue to share it as often as it takes to combat the epidemic that is plaguing our generation, gun violence. In October 2017, my friends, husband, and I, and countless others were at the Route 91 Music Festival when a gunman opened fire and killed 58 people, wounded nearly 500 others, devastating our city and changing our lives forever. People were here visiting Las Vegas to have an exciting, fun, memorable trip, only to experience the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. While we have made progress in the year since then, We've also seen continued violent incidents that have left both Nevadans and the economic engine of our state, Las Vegas tourists, questioning the safety of our community. In 2020, during a 3-month period from mid-July to October, we witnessed 7 shootings, including a shooting in front of the Aria, a handgun discharging inside the MGM on the casino floor, and a shooting outside the Miracle Mile shops at Planet Hollywood. And Metro Police confiscated 64 guns on the Strip. Metro Police Captain Dory Corrin said in a January interview to the Associated Press, quote, "Violent crime on the Strip rose significantly in September, and the primary driver for this activity was related to a sharp rise in firearm-related incidents and aggravated assaults," end quote. I know Metro and Sheriff are doing the best they can to handle this uptick, but they simply need more tools at their disposal. In a post-COVID world, we know we need to show visitors and residents alike that we are a place where you can come and forget about your problems, not come to find more. We know we need every single selling point we can to get our tourism economy back on track. Committee, on March 9th, 8 days before I presented a bill to give businesses the tools they need to enforce their firearm policies, a Wynn security guard officer was shot and killed in the Wynn parking garage. On March 23rd, 6 days after I presented that bill, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department investigated a deadly shooting inside a hotel room on the Las Vegas Strip. 1 month later, on April 25th, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department investigated a deadly shooting on the Las Vegas Strip just north of Harmon. 1 person was pronounced dead, the other hurt. And when I reached out to Metro yesterday, they reported they had 25 firearm-related calls on the Strip in the last 30 days. Committee members, we have the opportunity with Senate Bill 452 to help the largest driver of our state's economic recovery be safe for the 40 million visitors that visit Las Vegas every single year and the hundreds of thousands of Nevadans that go to work there every single day. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, I would like to, before we conclude, turn the presentation over to Aisha Molino, who I believe is joining us virtually.
Good morning, members of the Senate and Assembly Judiciary Committees, Chair Yeager, Chair Scheibel. Thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Aisha Molino, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Public Affairs for MGM Resorts. I want to thank Majority Leader Cannizzaro for bringing forth this measure. And I'd also like to thank Senator Dunyate and Assemblywoman Howdigi for your tireless effort on helping us to get this bill right. As the state's largest employer, we have a responsibility to keep our employees, our guests, and our customers safe. And ultimately, that's what this bill is all about. Let me first emphasize this about this bill. It does not change any existing rights for gun owners and CCW permit holders. As a private property owner, MGM Resorts already has the lawful right to prohibit guns on our properties, and we do. Under existing law, our unarmed security teams must first issue a verbal warning to a patron and ask who is in possession of a firearm. More often than not, these individuals either willingly surrender their firearms or they leave the premises. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. As a result, our employees and our patrons' safety is put at risk. The proposed bill before you would give private property owners the opportunity to resolve this issue by enforcing the same protections that you all currently have in all public buildings, including the legislative building, where it is a criminal act to bring a firearm onto the property without express written permission from the governing authority. This bill gives private property owners the ability to call Metro in certain circumstances where an individual ignores our lawful right to prohibit firearms and creates an unsafe environment for our employees and our guests. Importantly, this bill is opt-in. It does not create any additional mandates on private property owners. It applies only to non-restricted gaming licensees who choose to prohibit firearms on their property. In order to opt in, a licensee must post the prescribed signage at all public entrances, as well as other locations within the establishment. MGM Resorts already has signs on its properties to inform patrons that we are exercising our right to prohibit firearms, but we are very supportive of an opportunity to have uniform signage across all premises that choose to opt in to this bill. The bill has been specifically drafted to exempt trade shows such as SHOT Show, attendees of a trade show, on-duty law enforcement, and individuals who are specifically authorized by the private property owners to carry firearms on their properties. It is essential that we signal to our customers all over the world that Las Vegas is the safest place to be, and this bill will help send that signal. Thank you very much.
Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, this does conclude our portion of the presentation for Senate Bill 452. Thank you for the opportunity to share an overview of this bill as proposed to be amended. And again, as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic and continue to reopen Las Vegas, I believe it is essential that we again adapt and work better to address and prevent instances where the presence of guns puts lives at risk in our tourism and hospitality sector. Our industry's ability to recover will depend greatly on its ability to maintain and ensure the safety of our guests, patrons, and employees. I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge and thank Senator Doñate for his hard work on putting together this amended version that you see before you to hopefully address some of the concerns and make sure that we're putting forth policy that we know can work, because it does work in other instances, in other facilities, but also the tremendous bravery and strength of Assemblywoman Howdigi for being here, for being a tireless advocate to ensure that gun violence is not something that our community has to face, that we can be responsible, that we can make sure that people are protected, not only through her advocacy here in this building, but also for the strength in sharing her story, because that is not easy, and I can't imagine how hard that is on a daily basis, but to share it publicly and to use it as a platform to help create the kind of change that can keep people safe is something that is truly remarkable. So I'm very grateful that she is here today and for all of her hard work. Madam Chair, Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager, with your permission, we would like to open it up for any questions that you and the remainder of the committee members may have.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader Cannizzaro, Assemblywoman Howdigi, Senator Doñate, Ms. Molino. We appreciate you being here to present to us, and I know that our committee members will have plenty of questions for you. So do the members of the Senate Judiciary have questions at this time? I will go first to Senator Settlemyre.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I'm just curious, this is a little bit unusual, to say the least, this type of presentation and hearing. So do we address the amendment only, or are we saying that the bill's going to be amended, so we address it as both, or just the bill? And can I address to all the people who have presented, or how do you want to proceed?
Sure, Senator. I think that the amendment is friendly. So just like when someone normally presents a conceptual amendment, you could consider that to be the working document for asking questions about the bill. And yes, you are free to address your questions to any of the presenters.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In that respect, I appreciate the presentation by the MGM. It sounds to me like they're doing a pretty good job right now of actually practicing basically de-escalation protocols to ensure situations don't turn troublesome, to say the least. So I appreciate that, and I'm kind of curious why the current system doesn't necessarily work, because property owners do have the authority right now to prohibit firearms if they so choose, and current law states that. Law enforcement, can choose to respond to trespass violations in that respect, and it's kind of an internal policy on their behalf based upon the other multitude of things they have going on, whether or not they have the ability to respond based upon whether or not they feel it's a serious enough threat. So I'm just trying to figure out how this bill will change that in any way, shape, or form, and make it so that you have more law enforcement to respond, or they're saying maybe they just need to hire more security themselves. And of course, then within that whole question is, what does an individual supposed to do? They mentioned the discussion of the off-duty cops. What happens with them? It says active law enforcement, where law enforcement, at least in my counties that I represent, are required to carry a gun with them at all times, even when they are off duty. So I'm just trying to figure out how to wrap my head around all that in that respect. So I understand there's a few questions, to say the least, in there, but then again, I think the bill merits that.
And thank you very much for those questions. So importantly, I think what this bill does is right
And I'm
now
sorry.
under current law.
You need to put your name on the record when you answer the questions.
I'm sorry, this is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts.
You can go ahead.
Under current law, we're required to provide people who trespass onto our property with a firearm in contravention of posted signage a verbal warning before we are allowed to engage with law enforcement and ask law enforcement to assist us in removing those individuals from the property. What this bill would provide us is essentially an enhanced ability to de-escalate situations before they rise to a violent occasion by asking law enforcement to help us remove individuals from the property without issuing them a verbal warning. Our security guards often are not armed, and we oftentimes are asking our unarmed security guards to enter into a situation with armed individuals where there's a potential for an altercation, and ultimately the only tool at their disposal is to ask them to leave the property. And because there is no underlying prohibition preventing individuals from carrying firearms onto property in violation of law, all they're facing right now is a trespass charge. And so it can be very hard for us in those situations to actually remove people who don't want to turn over their firearms from the property. And so it's really just an enhancement tool that will allow us to engage with Metro in advance of a violent situation occurring.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. But again, I myself am a property owner, numerous times come across individuals that trespass on my property with guns. And so I understand and I feel for you in that respect. But law enforcement does not, at least in my community, have the ability to respond to those, even if the individual is actually literally firing that gun on my property. So I'm trying to figure out how you're going to have enough ability to have law enforcement. And then, of course, the question, why not include the off-duty cops, which are required by law, at least in my communities, they're required by their own rules to carry a gun with them at all times when in the general public?
Chair, if I may, I think, because that's an important question that I think Senator Settlemeyer is asking through you, Chair, to Senator Settlemeyer, Nicole Cannizzaro, Senate District 6. With respect to the law enforcement, if you look at the first page of the proposed amendment to Senate Bill 452, in subsection 3B, it says that this would not apply to a security guard of a covered premises or an officer of a law enforcement agency who is required to carry a firearm as part of his or her official duties and who is acting in his or her official capacity at the time of possession of the firearm on the covered premises. So that's piece one. And then piece two, if you go further down to subsection 4, it's any person who has the written consent of the owner or operator of the covered premises or an agent thereof to possess a firearm on the covered premises. And so this gives the ability for any covered premises to grant authority for someone who would, for example, be required to carry a firearm to obtain that consent. But it does expressly exclude law enforcement officers who would be, for example, there on duty or inside the covered premises. So I think between those two exceptions, that would be covered. And then I don't know if Ms. Molino had any additional comments.
Majority Leader, I appreciate that, but I guess my question is, it says that as part of his or her official duties, who is acting in their official capacity, it is a request of their employer that they carry a gun at all times. So are you saying that that means as long as your employer states that you have to carry a gun, that meets said criteria, or do they have to, go obtain permission ahead of time because I am my own employer, so I'll just require that I have to carry a gun?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Nicole Cannizzaro, Senate District 6, through you, Chair, to Senator Settlemeyer.
You can go direct.
Thank you. So this bill expressly applies to individuals who have that non-restricted gaming license. So this is not just private property owners, right? We're talking about a very specified group of entities that would be covered. So I would start there. Second of all, this language here is meant to say that if they're acting in their official duties and they're required to carry a firearm as a result of that, that they are not covered within the portions of this bill. But then there is also a section that would provide flexibility to allow for a covered premises to say, yes, we give you consent to carry that firearm on this property. So I think between those two, you would cover any of the instances that you're discussing.
Appreciate that. I'll go ahead and let it go, and I'll try to follow up with you more offline.
No, and I think the other thing I wanted to just also note that I do think is important is that this bill, this language, would not require any covered premises or operator to opt to put in place this particular policy. They could choose that that's not something that they want to do, right? They don't have to prohibit firearms on property. But if they do, then this is a tool that would allow them to do so and have an enforcement mechanism.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Other questions from Senator Hansen?
More of a comment and a question, I guess. Number one, all these policies would have been in place in October of 2017. MGM's a private business, and at that time, I can assure everybody that some guy bringing in, over a dozen rifles, not pistols, not concealed weapons, through their whole security system, using their service elevators, bringing in thousands of rounds of ammunition. All of that must have been security in place at the time that MGM dropped the ball on. And so for them to now come here and say everybody else in the entire Strip apparently has been failing to follow these protocols just doesn't add up. So to try to pass the buck off on everybody else on the Strip who probably have been doing good security by now saying, well, we need this new law. Yeah, MGM had the chance at the time to do that. So that disturbs me. The other question, as I understand it, Safari Club International, which are, I can assure you, probably about 99.9% pro-Second Amendment, are coming to Mandalay Bay. We have the SHOT Show that comes to Vegas, $275 million, all pro-Second Amendment people. If we're really worried about the economics of Clark County and the Strip, we better think about those people, because I know the Safari Club folks, and they're very upset about bills like this because, in effect, they're being singled out as being somehow responsible for the October 1st shooting. The only person responsible for that are the MGM people that allowed those dozen or whatever long guns to go through their service elevators even and cause that kind of a mass shooting. So my question is, at what point in this law, what will this new law allow that they didn't have at the time of the October 2017 shooting, that they could not do at the time, with the exception of the penalty of trespass?
Madam Chair, Chair Scheibel, if I may, through you to Senator Hansen, I would first note that even as we sit here today, and even within the last 30 days, there have been an enormous number of incidences where there have been firearms and shootings and violent crimes that have been occurring in these properties. So I think the idea that somehow what we have is working to keep hospitality workers safe, to keep guests safe, is simply belied by the facts of current law enforcement response. They are in need of another tool to help with the de-escalation piece of this, to ensure that we're not having the result of violent incidences occurring. And they also need additional tools to help ensure the safety of the people who are there. So this is not about one incident. This is about an ongoing issue that is demonstrated and supported by the facts that have been provided by law enforcement, by the incidences that are occurring within our tourism corridor, which has a huge impact not only on our community and on those workers, but on our state's economy as a whole. So I would start there. Second of all, with respect to industries where they have some of these trade shows, we are expressly including in the language of the bill, I would again direct to section 3B3, where we talk about guests of public accommodation facilities who are attending and participating in trade shows, so that they are not the individuals who are being targeted as a result of this. Of course, we want these trade shows to come to Las Vegas. We want those guests to be here. We also know that people are capable of being safe with firearms, and if we can make sure that those procedures are in place, then let's do that. And you see that reflected in the language of the amended portions of the bill. This is not intended to somehow be some overarching thing that says we don't want people to come, we don't want these shows to come. We are trying to build in enough safety and some exceptions here to ensure that that is the case, while still wanting to welcome, of course, those trade shows, those individuals. At the same time, we have an obligation. We, in fact, have a huge obligation to ensure the safety of those guests and the safety of the people who surround it. So we have some exceptions that are carved out here to ensure that. This, again, I would note, is opt-in. So a premises is not required to say that they do not want firearms on the property. They do not have to opt into this particular law. This is something that is completely discretionary for those property owners, and if they choose to use it, then this is giving them that additional enforcement tool. And as Ms. Molino mentioned, one of the issues that they have is that we're talking about workers who are unarmed, workers who are there trying to do their job, even, let's say they're a porter who is helping guests, and now they're the individual who may have to say to someone, hey, we have to go issue a verbal warning to someone, and these incidences can escalate very quickly. And what we're trying to do is to help utilize law enforcement to ensure that de-escalation happens so that that is not the result. And that's the intended purpose here.
Well, that's a nice intent, but you realize that you're essentially asking law enforcement to be able to almost randomly pat down people who show up at the building, and somebody in security then says, well, I think this guy may be a CCW holder and he didn't check his gun in. I mean, the level of increase of police response that you're talking about is almost a little bit frightening, because the truth is this, that people who are CCW holders in the state of Nevada, there are now hundreds of thousands of them, and there hasn't been a single case in Nevada of a CCW holder committing a so-called gun crime. Not any. So the idea that we're having this escalation of gun violence as if guns themselves somehow do it. In our building, we have security people walking around with open carry guns all over the place. Hasn't been a single example of one of those guns of doing anything violent to any of us. So I don't know, the whole definition of gun violence and all that doesn't make sense. Plus the very stats you bring up, look long term. The actual crime rate in Nevada has dropped since we've expanded the CCW program. So this whole thing is about emotion, not fact. And Madam Chair, I'm sorry, since we're doing it to where we're only allowed one thing, I wanted to get that on the record. Thank you for allowing me to speak. There are dozens of questions that really should be added. One other thing that really disturbs me too, this bill, this portion of this new emergency bill actually was already in the bill in the Assembly, and the Assembly said no. And to now bring it as an emergency measure on the Senate side is disingenuous and wrong to the whole process. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair Scheibel, through you to Senator Hansen, I did want to address just one piece of that. Nicole Cannizzaro, Senate District 6. Again, in Section 3 in the amended portion of the bill, subsection B1, there are specific allowances for security guards or law enforcement agencies who carry weapons. So to the example, in this building is an example of a building where people cannot bring firearms. You cannot bring firearms. There's a sign at the front door. You cannot bring a firearm into this building. We have amazing legislative police who are here, who do in fact open carry as part of their job duties. If we were to apply that same thing to this particular bill, they would be accepted by the language in this bill. Additionally, this does not give unfettered ability for law enforcement to skirt not only the Constitution with respect to search and seizure or with respect to their duties to find probable cause if they are going to encounter someone. This doesn't change law enforcement's duties. If we say something is prohibited conduct, law enforcement in any circumstance, has to have the right procedure and process in place. They're going to follow those procedures and processes in order to address that particular concern. So this bill does not say, forget the Constitution, we don't care about search and seizure law, we don't care about the Fourth Amendment, we don't care if law enforcement has probable cause. People calling complaints to law enforcement all the time. That's why we have a 911 system. People report things to law enforcement all the time, and they show up and they respond accordingly. And, we have to have faith in them that they're going to be able to do that. This doesn't change that. This says that this is prohibited conduct, and if we believe it is going on, we can make that report to law enforcement, and they would respond to address the situation. And the whole point of this is that there would be de-escalation with law enforcement, who we should trust to do their jobs appropriately in order to avoid further incidences of violence.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. I don't see any more. I see one more question on the screen. Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions, so let me try to kind of consolidate them. And they're practical questions, because I understand the emotional response to want to, and the practical response, the legal response, trying to fix a problem that we've seen. And so I respect that. So I'm thinking about the practical terms with respect to the verbal warnings and how we enforce this. First, when it comes to the verbal warnings, how do we know that they occurred? I'm thinking a person walks in with a firearm, whether it's concealed or not. We'll get into the distinction in a second, but they walk in and they're given a verbal warning, or they're not given a verbal warning. It's an evidentiary issue. How is that proven? I would imagine the resort would have the burden to prove that the verbal warning was given, but how does one prove that a person was carrying at the time and actually got the verbal warning? Are they recorded, or are the security guards now wearing body cameras? How does this work?
Senator, this is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts. Thank you for the question. Verbal warnings are used all the time in these sorts of trespass situations. And from our perspective, our security guards generally keep a record of when verbal warnings are issued and when we ask people to leave the property. So we think that sort of issue is not a significant barrier to enforcement in this regard.
I'm not suggesting that's a barrier. I'm just wondering how it works. So it's a written record made after the fact. I'm just trying to think through this because, one of the things that's written in the amendment is for the, and in the original, was for the permission. I'm not sure how one goes about getting permission, but how does then the security officer know whether or not they have permission? Or for that matter, if they're even carrying at that moment. So let me ask it this way. A security officer, armed or unarmed, because that's of course up to the employer to determine whether or not they're going to hire armed security. And I understand the desire not to have, a militarized zone or that sense. But they walk up to a person and they're carrying concealed. How do they know that they're carrying and don't have permission?
Senator, if I could just note, I think that a lot of the questions that you're raising, some of them are the same questions that others in the Senate also raised. And Senator Dugnade's amendment actually does a lot to address a lot of those questions. So Senator Dugnade's amendment does not distinguish between concealed and open carry in part, I believe, for that reason. So okay. A lot of your concerns have been addressed.
Yeah, but the amendment doesn't address how the security officer determines whether or not the person's carrying and whether or not the person has permission to carry. How is that done?
And if
Senator, just no, please.
Chair Scheibel, I wanted to give one example, and then I think Assemblywoman Hodegui may have some answers as well. Through you, Chair Scheibel, to Senator Pickard, Nicole Cannizzaro, Senate District 6. So there was a question in there about how do you obtain permission, and I'll give an example. The courthouse in Las Vegas permits certain individuals to carry within that courthouse, but you have to obtain permission prior to being able to do that. And so you would go through a process by which you would ask for permission and give whatever documents or other indicia that you have some sort of training if they want to, or if they require you to have a CCW permit such that you've had that training, or whatever other information they may need. But that is something that is not unique to this bill. That occurs in other facilities where you can grant permission and would go about it by simply contacting the premises and finding out whatever it is that they need in order to do so. And in fact, it does happen in the courthouse in Las Vegas, where certain individuals can be given permission to carry inside of the courthouse concealed. And then I don't know if Assemblywoman wanted to address some of the other questions.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you, Senator, for the question. And I think what's important to note is that we're not changing existing policies, we're just strengthening them. So there was a portion of your question that asked, how would they identify someone who is carrying? The covered premises already have these policies in place because they already have policies in place that restrict firearms from their premises. All Senate Bill 452 is trying to do is give teeth to existing policies. So in many of the non-restricted gaming license properties on the Strip, they already have policies that exist that say no firearms are allowed on their properties. And that applies to everyone. Whether you're a CCW holder or open carrying, you already can't be on their premise with a firearm. And so what this is doing, Senate Bill 452, is just, again, giving teeth to already existing policies. So, you ask how would they handle, someone who steps foot on their property with a firearm. They already have existing policies to address that. This is just a mechanism to give them teeth to enforce their existing policy.
And if you could identify yourself on the record, please.
I apologize, Chair. This is Assemblywoman Sandra Howdigi, District 41.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I guess maybe I'm not being clear because I'm interested in the mechanics. So since it's already an existing policy, how do they currently identify someone? If they walk up to someone who they believe is carrying and they deny that they're carrying, how do they verify it? Do they pat them down? Do they require them to remove their outer clothing? How do they verify it? How does one go about finding out if that person is actually carrying? Because I assume that since now we're adding a criminal penalty instead of just trespass, that there's got to be a certain level of evidence that they were actually carrying. So how do we obtain that evidence?
Senator, our security guards don't, as a matter of course, frisk our customers. And as I noted, in most situations where our security guards believe that a person is on the premises carrying a firearm in contravention of our policy, and we ask those people to turn over their firearms because we are a firearm-free zone, most individuals, especially the law-abiding individuals that you are so rightfully, I think, so concerned about, are more than willing to turn over their firearms. They're not there to make trouble. They don't want to make trouble. They want to be on the property. They want to have a good time, and they comply with our policies and respectfully do so. And so the sorts of incidences that you are that you are suggesting, they aren't commonplace. What we are trying to solve for here is a situation where we have individuals who don't want to comply with our policies, who are there for the wrong reasons, who are there to create trouble. And it's in those circumstances that our security guards really do need to be able to rely on police officers, on additional Metro assistance in order to make sure that our facilities remain a safe and secure place for our employees, for our guests, and for our customers.
All right. And I appreciate that response because it sounds like the law-abiding individuals do comply with your policies, and it's not commonplace. However, we heard in prior testimony that the Strip is a dangerous place right now without this law, particularly in the resort corridor. So apparently that's not the case. Apparently this is not commonplace, but I'm trying to get at the bad actors. I agree with you. I think that the law-abiding citizens will comply with the requirements. I'm trying to get at the, and I don't feel like I'm getting straight answers, but I'm trying to get it. We've got a bad actor. We've got somebody in the facility that wants to do harm. Okay, Paddock is one example. It sounds like there are others. How is it that we currently, under existing law, identify and struggle with removing the person? Because, it sounds to me like you're saying law enforcement doesn't respond presently. And yet the testimony was exactly the opposite. So I'm trying to reconcile the discrepancies in what we've already heard today. It's not common, and yet this is a problem. It's dangerous, but it doesn't happen. It's not commonplace. We don't frisk, but we don't know if they're carrying, but we assume they are. I mean, can you tell me how this actually works and how this bill, because as far as I can tell, the only thing this bill does is it adds a criminal penalty to the existing scheme with a few alterations around the margins. So how is it that we currently find out how do they defend themselves if they don't have a gun, and how do they how does security currently get to the bad actors, and how is a criminal penalty going to improve the police response?
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. And Senator, I think as I hear the question that you're trying to get at is what is the problem that we're really trying to solve for here? And from my perspective, here's the problem. Right now, Nevada is one of just a couple of jurisdictions where there is no underlying legal prohibition on people carrying firearms on the casino floor. So if we, as a private property owner, didn't post the signage that prohibited individuals from carrying firearms within our casino, there is nothing preventing them from carrying firearms in a very crowded environment. And from our perspective, that is a predicate, a set of circumstances that we don't want on our private property, which is why we as private property owners have chosen to prohibit it. But I think that what we're trying to solve for is a circumstance where an individual carries a very dangerous firearm across our property, and there's absolutely nothing that we can do in order to stop that from happening, even though we have already posted signage prohibiting it, unless our security guard goes up to that individual and engages directly with them. From our perspective, we have already posted signage telling people that they are not allowed to carry firearms on our property. As a private property owner, at the point at which we become aware that an individual is violating that policy, we should be able to engage with Metro. We should be able to engage with law enforcement in order to get assistance to remove that person from the property. And that's what this is.
We seem to be saying the same things over and over again. And so let me get off this point. Let me ask another question. And that has to do with the extent of the prohibition. Does this apply to every area that is within the property boundaries of the property, or is this just within the casino floor? In other words, can a person legally carry into a restaurant or a shopping mall or whatever that might be associated with and within the property, but not part of the gaming operation? Or would this be a blanket prohibition that if someone steps in to because I'm assuming you're not putting these big signs on every single door. What if they miss it and they walk in without knowing? Now it's a crime if they're just going to buy an Apple Watch or something. How does this work?
This is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts for the record. So, Senator, a couple of things. So just like with every other private property, first of all, this bill is an opt-in bill. Second, as the majority leader noted, it would apply only to unrestricted licensees. But third, just like with regard to any other private property owner, we as an unrestricted licensee have decided that our private property in its entirety is a firearm-free zone. And so for our purposes, it would apply to the entirety of our property. I'd also note that under the bill, we are required to post signage on every public entrance. So we would, in fact, put it at every door.
Okay, because right now the interpretation has historically been it's just at the entrance, not necessarily on every single door. But that'll be interesting to see how that works. But all right. If we're talking about, well, I noticed in the amendment, the parking lot is, you're allowed to store it in the parking lot. How is it then that if we're not giving them a warning, they walk in, they didn't see the sign, whatever that may be, they're not given a verbal warning anymore. They go directly to jail if they're carrying, and they're not given an opportunity to put it in their car. Is that right? And then also, it sounds like you already have the signs up. How many people have obeyed that signage?
Senator, as I noted earlier, again, I think that what happens in the majority of circumstances when we're dealing with law-abiding individuals is when they're asked to turn over their firearm, because we are a firearm-free zone, whether that would be by us or potentially by law enforcement when they respond, they would do so. And, by all accounts, once that happens, we have no desire for there to be a situation where law-abiding individuals who made an honest mistake are subject to or being criminally punished for what was an honest mistake, right? So I think that in the vast majority of circumstances, the situation that you are pointing out would be ably addressed in a way that didn't create any sort of punitive action for a person who was making an honest mistake.
I guess I just don't see the need, given it sounds like you're already doing everything that you need to do. But how many people have, to the second part of the question, how many people have been stopped and have either turned in their firearm or have taken it to their car since you first posted the signs on your doors?
Okay, I think we're getting to the point where the questions are becoming redundant, and we've heard Ms. Molino say several times that in most cases, when they ask somebody to turn in their firearm,
question that never got answered.
that usually people comply. So I'm going to ask you if you have any other questions.
And Chair, I do think we also had one other item that we wanted to just add, because I think there's been I think some of the general overview of those questions have to deal with what and why and how this would affect the ability of the business to kind of operate. And I think the Assemblywoman wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Chair, and I will have to excuse myself after this. I do have a committee to get to, and we are work sessioning. But I think it's important to note that when conversations on this policy started over a year ago, we looked at what other states did, and many other states have already implemented these business empowerment policies, and we looked to Texas, and Texas actually implemented this policy, and their businesses have not suffered. They are still very much succeeded, and they did exactly what we are trying to do, give business property owners the rights to implement policies that would keep their employees and their customers safe. Thank you, Chair Scheibel, and with your permission, I'm going to excuse myself.
We understand. Thank you for joining us, Assemblywoman Howdicky. Senator Pickard, are you finished?
Well, I have a lot of questions that still remain unanswered, but I won't take any more time. I wish we could get direct answers to direct questions, but I understand the politics behind it. I'll let it go at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Senator Harris, go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe most of my questions will be for Ms. Molino. And I'm going to ask you a couple things, but I understand you haven't had much time to think about it, so feel free to say you can't commit to anything at this point if that, in fact, is your genuine response. So the bill, the proposed amendment requires covered premises to adopt policies and procedures to kind of enact the bill. Would your employer at least be open to the idea of putting in place a policy and procedure that would allow off-duty officers to somehow inform security guards that they are carrying and give them permission? Is that something you think you guys could build into your policy on how this bill would work?
This is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts, for the record. Senator, thank you for that question. I have not had a chance to look into that in any great detail, but I would say to you that I'm happy to have that conversation with you. I think, again, what we're trying to get out with this bill is a situation where folks who are not law-abiding citizens, who are carrying on the premises in a manner that is in contravention of our policies, and when asked to remedy that situation, don't do so or are unwilling to do so, where we have law enforcement assistance to remove those persons from the premises. And so to the extent that that is not the case, we would be happy to see if there's a way that we can address those circumstances in a way that doesn't undermine the core purpose of the bill.
Thank you so much. Ms. Molino, another question I have is, would your employer be willing to consider maybe offering lockers where people can willingly surrender their firearms, as opposed to, I guess, having their firearm taken away to some place where they may not see it and have to kind of rely upon the private property to promise that they will give it back? I think we may be able to add compliance here if there's a mechanism for folks to just willingly turn their gun over, maybe in a gun locker, keep that key with them, and then pick it back up when they leave. Is that something you guys would be willing to think about?
This is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts. Thank you, Senator, for that question. As I noted in my comments to Senator Pickard, these situations have happened before. We have had circumstances where our guests or others come onto the property, don't realize that they have a firearm, and when asked to turn over their firearm, they do turn it over to us, and we hold that for them in a manner where it is safe but accessible to them at the time that they want it. We have not heard that there is that there have been any concerns with that, or that is a disincentive to people that prevents them from turning over the firearm when asked. So, I'm happy to have that discussion with you. We're not aware that particular circumstance has been a problem or a disincentive that prevents compliance with our policies.
Thank you so much. And I just really want to encourage you all to consider maybe placing some on the property where folks can kind of willingly, before they even come into contact with a security guard or anyone, to, hand over their gun and have access to it. Lastly, would you all be willing to what are your plans to inform the public of this new law? I think that, people understanding that this is a thing now, and some of that confusion, creates some of these issues, and especially if we're going to have some properties opting in and other properties opting out, I think it will be very important for those properties who choose to opt in to make sure that they make that as known to the general public as possible. So could you tell me a little bit about what your plans may be to get the message out that, hey, we do not allow guns on this property. And if you do bring a gun on this property, there is a stricter kind of enforcement than if you went into your local coffee shop and they asked to have you leave.
This is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts for the record. Thank you, Senator, for that question as well. So a couple of things. First of all, we do currently have signage posted at our properties, as you know. For those properties that choose to opt in pursuant to this bill, there also is a 7-day, I'll call it a delayed implementation. So once a property opts in, there's a 7-day period before the criminal penalties would kick in. So there is a chance for people to become aware through that mechanism. In addition, we will work with all of our convention partners, all of the general partners who utilize our premises, to make sure that they are aware that this is in fact policy, and that there are now criminal penalties pursuant to this law in the state of Nevada for violating the policies in a manner that would violate this bill if enacted. So we will absolutely do our part to make sure that our guests, that our convention partners and other partners are well aware of not only our policy, but aware of this law should it pass.
And thank you so much for that answer. I really appreciate that. I understand that the signs are kind of more of what I would call like a passive measure. And I think those active measures are going to be just as important, if not more important, in kind of cutting this off at the front end. So I would encourage you all to do as much proactive work as you can to get the word out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And this is actually, for the record, Senator, very briefly, we share your objective of making sure that our guests are not surprised. So certainly understand that point, and certainly we'll work toward that.
All right, thank you. I understand you have a question, Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, Chair Scheibe. I'll keep it brief, and thank you, Majority Leader, for bringing the bill, and thank you to Assemblywoman Haudegi. My question for Ms. Molina is, if this bill passed with the proposed amendment from Senator Doñate, do you think that your employer would be open to keeping data statistics just to make sure that the law is not being used, for racial profiling or anything like that, and maybe keep that data and share that data as to who's being questioned?
Senator, my understanding is that Senator, my understanding is that the Gaming Commission already collects much of that data, so there already are mechanisms in place for data collection around those sorts of issues. I'd also note that as a place of public accommodation, we are already subject to very strict anti-discrimination laws under existing Nevada law as well as under federal law, and as a unrestricted licensee that also carries a privileged license, we of course take all of these obligations extremely seriously.
And if you could put your name on the record, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, this is Aisha Molina. I'm doing this for the record.
Thank you, Ms. Molina. Thank you, Chair.
All right. I think we have a question from Assemblywoman Bilbright Axelrod.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for presenting this bill. I'm sort of going to piggyback onto my colleague from the Senate on that, because I did want to talk about Section 4 and all the subsections under that, the de-escalation, the cultural diversity competency. I just kind of wanted to get an idea of what that looked like, because I do feel I like this. I mean, I understand the intent of this bill, and I as a mother myself, I always say my number one job is to keep my child safe, and so that's what we want to do with our community, right? But I do have a concern that the unintended consequences that we will be, unfortunately, racially profiling people and asking Black and brown people about their guns more than we would white people. So that I just, if you could discuss that aspect. And you mentioned that the gaming control has that information. I was not aware of that, and I don't know if that's something that the legislature sees. And then my last question, and I'll leave it at this, is I just want to be clear. Is there no verbal warning at all now? Or is the intent that you would ask someone, they would get I'm a little confused about that aspect. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions, Assemblywoman. This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. So first of all, let me just say that diversity training and making sure that all of our guests experience a hospitable environment is a core part of who we are at MGM Resorts. We would not have a business if we did not treat all of our guests with an equal amount of respect, and that is something that we take extraordinarily seriously. In terms of the training that we provide, making sure that, again, that all of our guests are treated equally is part of training for all of our employees, and certainly for our security employees to understand that there can be no disparate treatment amongst our guests in any aspect of how they enforce our policies is present. It's something that everybody is required to do as a part of their job description. In terms of gaming, they do collect information regarding enforcement of these sorts of policies on our properties, and so I'm not fully aware of their policies regarding sharing that information with members of the legislature. But I'm happy to get more information about that and follow up if that would be helpful.
Thank you. And if you could just, the last question was that I had asked about, is there a verbal warning? I'm just not clear on that.
Sure, absolutely. And, again, Assemblywoman, the way that this bill is structured is for those unrestricted licensees that choose to opt in, it gives us the opportunity to engage with Metro and ask for law enforcement assistance where our security guards believe that would be an important tool in order to proactively prevent violence. That is not to say that in no circumstances will we provide a verbal warning, or in no circumstances will we engage with people who come onto our property with a firearm. And there may be many circumstances where our security guards continue to use the tools that they have been using in order to de-escalate, and that they engage with a person on our property, or they are engaging with a person on our property, and at that point become aware that that person is carrying a firearm and ask them to leave the property. And so there are going to be a variety of tools that our security guards that currently use and continue to use in order to make sure that our properties are kept a firearm-free zone. And so I don't think it's as black and white as if this bill passes, we will cease to give verbal warning. I just think in a real world environment, there will continue to be engagement. There will be continued efforts to de-escalate. But as has been noted earlier, this bill would give us one more tool in order to make sure that our environments stay as safe and secure as possible.
And this is really my last thing. Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate that. And I guess that just gives me a little bit of concern that some people could be treated differently than others. So because it's sort of like, well, sometimes we'll do it and sometimes we don't, I think my fear is what that's going to look like in practicality and who gets a verbal warning and who doesn't. And when it gets escalated to bringing the police in. And I believe me, I understand your intent in this bill. I really, please understand that. I just get concerned that when it's not just, yes, we would give a verbal warning across the board, that there's going to be some unintended consequences. Thank you.
All right. I believe Assemblywoman Cohen also had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm way too short for these microphones. Thank you all for the presentation. I do agree that the intent, that we all want to make sure that people are as safe as possible. And in that regard, and in the interest of not surprising people, would you be willing to agree to include language that websites on the resorts have to include this information? Because I have a real concern about someone driving across country, getting here, and finding out that they can't bring their weapon inside the casino or inside the resort. And then maybe it's and they say, well, I'm not going to turn my weapon over. And maybe it's NASCAR week, maybe it's, there's a big convention in town and they're driving around town and they cannot find a place to stay. And I don't think that helps anyone's safety if you've got that person who might be very upset, very unhappy, and they're driving around looking for a place to stay because they just came across country and had no way of knowing that this was going to happen when they got here.
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. Assemblywoman, thank you for that question. One of the things that this bill does is it does provide property owners that opt in, and it does make clear that for property owners that opt in, they may choose to give written permission to certain individuals. So in the circumstance that you described, right, where we're dealing with folks that have made an honest mistake or were unaware of policy for whatever reason, there are multiple avenues by which that mistake or their lack of knowledge about the policy can be cured. So in a circumstance where they aren't, for example, comfortable handing over their firearm, they could ask for specific written permission to perhaps keep the firearm in their car or something like that. The intent here is not to go after, again, individuals that have made an honest mistake or are unaware. It's to help us prevent acts of violence from happening on our properties before they occur.
All right, thank you. And then I guess also kind of following along with some of the questions about exceptions, I also wanted to get back to the off-duty law enforcement officers, because I do believe that there are different agencies in the state that require their law enforcement officers to carry at all times, and even when they're off duty. And I also can't imagine those people, like, every time. I think, I've said it haven't said it this session, so I might as well say it again. I'm a daughter of a retired parole and probation officer. She had to carry at all times. And I cannot imagine every time that we went to a resort for a wedding, to meet family members from out of town, to go have dinner, that every time she'd have to go to security and get an exception to wear or to keep her weapon that she was required by her agency to carry at all times. So I would ask that you consider changing that exception so that off-duty officers can carry.
I believe this question was already answered. I don't know if you want to repeat your answer, Majority Leader, or move on to another question. Is that all you have? Something going?
Yes, although I don't think it was fully addressed, but because I don't think getting an exception it's not the way it's written, that you get that exception, and I don't think them having to go to the facility to get an exemption would be a good idea, but I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Other questions from the committee? Assemblymember Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to kind of go back to that, because what I've seen now for about 110 days in this building is bills come before me that I read thoroughly, and someone says, well, this is the intent of the bill. So I figure in 2023, we're going to be back here for our first 200 bills will be, this is what we're cleaning up from 2021. Because the intent of the bill is not usually what the plain language, I shouldn't say usually, but sometimes not what the plain language of the bill is. So I think part of the problem we're having is, as we look at the amendment here, where it says an officer of a law enforcement agency who is required to carry a firearm, and who is acting in his or her official capacity. That means on duty. They are not in an official capacity when they are off duty. So the plain language of this bill is different than what we're hearing the intent of the bill is. So given that scenario, and I'm sure as a prosecutor you understand that thoroughly, they don't go back to the intent unless there's some ambiguity in there. But given that, a officer of the law, walking into a cafe who's off duty, doesn't see the sign, etc., going to go get something to eat, and someone goes to security and says, that gentleman over there, I think he's carrying a gun, I think I saw something. And security stops him. Or anybody, not an officer of the law, but anybody. And security stops him, and he doesn't want them to know that he's carrying a gun. So they ask him, are you armed? And he says, no. And he keeps walking. What is that scenario? When someone says no, anybody, not just a cop, but someone says no, what's the scenario? Where does it go from there? Does that then become a stop and frisk type situation, which I think we're trying to stay away from here?
Chair Scheibel, through you to Assemblyman Wheeler, Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. So I think first and foremost, of course, in this building, if we passed every law and it was completely perfect and worked exactly the way that we wanted, most of us would not be sitting here today, Assemblyman, because there's always changes from something that had been passed that needed to be clarified because it didn't work exactly the way that we wanted. So I don't think that the idea that potentially at some point someone may make a revision to the Nevada revised statutes is somehow, I think, detrimental to this particular language. That said, with respect to plain language, the point about law enforcement officers who would be on duty, there's an express exception here, that where they are required to carry that firearm as part of their duties, and they're acting in those official capacities, they are exempted from the language in this bill. Again, as in the same subsection in the plain language of the bill in subsection 4, there is language here that says that they may have the consent of the operator of the premises. And that operates the same way as many other places where carrying a firearm is prohibited. The example that I gave earlier was the courthouse, where there is an very express prohibition on carrying firearms into the courthouse unless you have the consent of the premises in order to carry a firearm on that property. Now, maybe those procedures differ between what a covered premises in this, who would opt into this particular law would require and what is required for the courthouse. But that is a very real example of how exactly this kind of thing works. And there are officers who are there who are not on duty, who may have a firearm. They're also concealed carry concealed carry permit holders who are permitted to concealed carry within that building because they have obtained that consent. And so I think that between these two exceptions that are in the plain language of the amendment here in subsection 3B1 and 4, that is covered in the plain language, not just the intent. That is the intent. Of course, making a record of intent is always something that we strive to do and something that is very helpful when it comes to legal analysis should a law be challenged. But to your point, the plain language does include exceptions for that. Additionally, and I think your other question is, what happens if somebody is not truthful when they're asked if they are carrying a firearm? And I think, I don't know if Ms. Molino wants to weigh in on that as well, but I think they've talked a lot about trying to give verbal warnings where that may be appropriate. Individuals tend to comply with that, but where that's not the situation, they may need the assistance of law enforcement in order to engage in de-escalation so that we don't have a violent incident that occurs. Now, I would note that in any circumstance, if we were to say that firearms are prohibited on schools, which is in fact the case, if somebody were to say, well, I don't have a firearm, then this law operates the same way as we have for those facilities. And so I don't know if Ms. Molino had anything else to add, but I think, that's sort of delving into, well, what happens if somebody's not truthful about what they're doing? That is the same thing as if somebody is pulled over for driving while intoxicated and asked if they had anything to drink and they say no. Right? At some point, like, the safety of the community kicks in and we're trying to make sure we have the tools to address that. But in these instances, I think most people, as Ms. Molino has indicated numerous times today, most people who are approached and say, hey, this is actually a place where you cannot have a firearm, are more than willing to oblige. But those who aren't or who are seeking to engage in violent behavior, they want to be able to have a tool to address that as well.
Thank you, but maybe Ms. Molina can answer it because I don't think I got a real answer there. Someone says no and turns around and walks away. Is he allowed to walk away, or he or she is that person stopped? What is the procedure? Where do we go from there? Is he stopped? Is he frisked? We can't seem to get that answer. What is the procedure? I've walked into very many casinos. I'm a CCW holder, and many times walked in without it. But if someone came up to me and asked me, and I said no, I'm not going to allow them to frisk me. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But I don't understand what the procedure is from that point on. Someone says no, and you ask them to leave, you escort them out, you stop them. I don't get it. What could we just? I'm sure Ms. Molina would be the one to answer that question.
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts. Assemblyman Wheeler, as we've discussed numerous times today, the goal of this bill is to stop incidences of violence before they occur. This is not a bill that's supposed to go after law-abiding individuals who, for whatever reason, have forgotten or for other reasons are carrying a firearm on our property. To the extent that somebody is carrying a firearm on our property, including off-duty law enforcement, let's say, and our security guards become aware of it, and they choose to engage with that individual, at that point, there is no stop and frisk. But if they believe the person is carrying a firearm in contravention of our policy, they would be asked to leave. If the individual did not leave, and this is under existing law, if the individual did not leave at that point, then we could call law enforcement to engage. In the circumstance that you're describing, I can't imagine that an off-duty law enforcement officer would have any desire to get into an altercation with us over violating our own policies. And at the point where they're asked to leave, they would merely leave, and there would be no incidents to follow.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair Scheibel, if I just may, I think, add to that, Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. Assemblyman, there are, and I guess I'm, one of the, I think, hard parts about answering the question that you are asking is, what are the specific details? Like, do you see the outline of a firearm in someone's pocket? Are they sort of fidgeting with it? Are they, did a cartridge case fall out on the floor? Like those kinds of things, right? There are indicia that may lead you to believe that someone is carrying a weapon. Those would be the kind of details that that would be important to what happens next, right? If someone says no and there's no probable cause, this isn't giving law enforcement nor security the unfettered right to just stop and frisk whomever they want, right? The law still applies. The Fourth Amendment still applies. You still have to have those kinds of things in place. People call and say, hey, this person seems to be driving drunk on the road. If law enforcement responds and pulls that individual over, and it turns out that they're not in fact drinking, and they're not in fact under the influence, maybe they had a dog in the car and the dog jumped on their lap and that's why they swerved a little, it's not as though law enforcement's going to show up and be like, well, we got a call that someone said that you were driving drunk, so we're just going to go ahead and arrest you for a DUI. That's not how the law works. Those things are not taken out of our general understanding of how investigations work, about how the Constitution works. It doesn't change any of those things. So some of that is very fact determinative about exactly what was observed and exactly how that happened. But I think the important point about this particular bill is it is putting in place language to say that where a covered premises opts in to say we don't want firearms on the property, here are some of the exceptions. Here's what that property has to do to comply with that. We're going to make sure there's good training. We're going to make sure that there are proper notifications at every entrance, at the cashier's cage, at check-in, so that people are aware of this. We're going to make sure we're working with guests and folks who are in there to make sure that people are safe, but where they may need the intervention of law enforcement for de-escalation purposes before it turns into a shooting, before it turns into an assault with a deadly weapon, that they can do that. And that's what this is designed to do. And so I understand that there may be some frustration in that the question isn't being answered, but I think one of the hard parts about it is that this is but a tool of many, and it is saying here are the procedures in place if somebody says we don't want firearms on the property.
Okay, thank you very much. You did say something about training, though. I'm just wondering, I didn't see anything in the bill about training. Also, you think Stockman's Casino or Sharky's is going to get that training?
Chair Scheibel, Fabian Donati for the record. To answer the Assemblyman's question, in my proposed amendment, if you go towards the end of the first page, I covered, one of my worries was making sure, throughout today, we've had conversations as to what happens in this situation, whether if it's law enforcement officers off duty and everything. But the narrative that we're forgetting are the situations that our security guards are in most of these times, and the situations that they have to deal with on the casino floor. And I think that's an important narrative that we continue to have. And so that's why in this amendment, proposed amendment, it says any covered premises must adopt policies and procedures to enact this section, including de-escalation techniques. And then we go further beyond that to cover some of the racial and implicit biases that could happen in these certain situations.
All right, thank you. Assemblymember Krasner.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Thank you for the presentation. I do understand and appreciate the intent of the bill. The October 1, 2017 massacre was a horrific nightmare. I have a family. I want my family to be safe too when we travel. But there's always reasonableness in the law, and it has to be reasonable to the average law-abiding citizen so that they can follow the law. People want to follow the law. A person who's a CCW carrier wants to follow the law. So I'm taking the bill in conjunction with the friendly amendment. And I am looking at, on the friendly amendment, Section 3B does not apply to, and moving down to subsection 3, a guest of public accommodation facility who, sub-Roman numeral 4, notifies the public accommodation facility in writing that his or her bag contains an unloaded firearm. Okay, so I have a compound question here because when do they notify? 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week? That's the first part. Second, I'm looking at the cute picture of the sign that says, firearms are prohibited unless you have the written consent of the owner or operator. It doesn't have a phone number there. It doesn't have an email there. It doesn't have an address where I can write my letter. a law-abiding citizen says, oh, owner, what's an owner of a casino that's a publicly held corporation? Oh, you look that up. The shareholders are the owners of a publicly held corporation. So do I have to write to every shareholder? Do I write to just the majority shareholders? Who's the operator? I don't know. Multiple people go into operating a casino. And then I looked at the MGM website. I looked at the top. I looked at the middle. I looked at the bottom. Nowhere does it say, if you want to bring your concealed carry permit or get permission from the owner or operator of this property, here's the address, here's the email, here's the phone number, here's the name. It says nothing. I even went to the facts and the commonly asked questions. So how does the law-abiding citizen find out who they're supposed to get the written consent from so they can be law-abiding? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Through you, Chair Scheibel, to the Assemblywoman Nicole Cannizzaro, Senate District 6. I'll weigh in, and then if Ms. Molino wanted to add anything, or Senator Doñate wanted to add, I can let them add as well. So with respect to the signs that are included in this particular bill are posted at the cashier's cage at check-in and at all the entrances to the building. So I think to say that because it doesn't say because there's no telephone number or email address, that somebody would interpret that as having to go contact all of the shareholders when they're standing in the property and reading the sign, seems a little less than reasonable to me, especially because that is how this operates for a variety of facilities. When you walk into this building that we are in today, there's a sign that says you may not carry a firearm on this premises. The signs are on the property. So certainly I think to your point about whether there should be additional dissemination of information to advise people that this particular premises has opted into a law that restricts the carrying of firearms on property is certainly a question that we've heard, I think, from a couple of different members. And I know Ms. Molino had talked about their efforts to ensure that guests have full understanding of what is permitted and not permitted in their efforts of outreach. But with respect to the ambiguity, I think that you're trying to get at in the sign, those signs are on the property. So I would presume that you could just ask someone who is there working at the property when you see the sign on the property. With respect to when to notify, obviously this law is pretty clear that they want folks who are coming into the property to have the unloaded firearm and to let folks know. So I don't know that there is ambiguity built into the language of this bill because it says that they must notify the public accommodation facility in writing that they have a bag that contains an unloaded firearm. That is something that prior to entering the premises you would do because otherwise you can't bring that firearm onto the premises. But I don't know if Ms. Molino wanted to add anything else to that, or Senator Doñate, I think, has some additional information, and then if Ms. Molino wanted to weigh in, Chair.
Chair Scheibel, I want to give just a quick background as to how I got to my amendment, and hopefully that can address as well some of the concerns that you documented. So, in public health, we always talk about how we can develop good public health policies that influence behavioral health science. And that means that the actions that people carry out can influence the health and safety of everyone else. In public health policy, we always talk about three things. We talk about education, enforcement, and engineering. Those are the three E's that we always talk about. Education, that was covered earlier through Ms. Molino's testimony, where she mentioned that as part of this implementation, that MGM properties would carry out the education for their visitors and residents to understand this new change. Enforcement, this policy covers the same way that we would do for any other public buildings or schools, and which in my opinion would eventually lead to good policy, because the same way that you can't bring a firearm into a stadium or a sports entertainment center, that's learned already through behavioral science. And then the last thing is engineering. This amendment builds on the concept of public health because not only are we providing signage at public entrance areas, we are building on that and making sure that guests who are not staying at the hotel are informed of this at the cashier's area, and then also for those who are staying there are being made aware when they're checking into the hotel. Having those three sections and building on the education, enforcement, and engineering of this policy can lead to behavioral changes, and I think that's something that we have to recognize. But I'll let Ms. Molino carry on.
Thank you very much for that response, Senator. The only thing that I would add to what you and the majority leader said is that
Is your name?
The plan. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Aisha Resorts. That a plain reading of the sign and plain reading of the statute make clear that it's the owner or operator of the unrestricted licensee or an authorized agent thereof. So all of our employees will be trained when asked to direct individuals to the appropriate authorized agent who can give permission to the extent appropriate.
Follow up, please. So actually, my question was, Assemblywoman Lisa Krasner, for the record, my question was for Ms. Molino. The sign is vague and ambiguous. I understand it says, firearms are prohibited. Okay, you have to get written consent of the owner or operator. It doesn't say where. There's nothing at the bottom, no address to where I can write my letter, no email where I can shoot a quick email, no phone number even where I can call, and there certainly isn't an NRS section listed at the bottom that I can look up on my iPhone. And then I went to the website, and it's not on the website either. This is who to contact if you're a CCW carrier and you want written permission to bring your firearm onto our premises. So how does the law-abiding citizen comply with the law? I think most people want to comply with the law. So I'm just wondering if you could help me. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, Assemblywoman. And, as I noted, and as the senator noted as well, we do and will continue to train all of our employees about how these particular provisions will be enforced. And so the law-abiding citizen who wants to comply with our policies and comply with the law merely will need to ask any of our employees where they can get written permission or how they can get written permission, and they'll be directed to get that information. Much like, our employees are well trained to answer thousands and thousands of discrete questions that they get from our guests every day. As you can imagine, given the nature and scale of our operations, we have guests who have any number of questions, and they ask, and they're guided to the appropriate place to get those answers. And so in terms of their ability to get those answers from our employees, that is incumbent upon us to make sure that our employees are well trained to guide them to the appropriate place, to the appropriate agent, as noted in both the signage and in the legislation, where they can get the appropriate permissions, and we will provide that training.
So just a quick follow-up. So you're saying that people can get a verbal permission, then it's not going to have to be written, and they're not going to have to do it in advance. They can do it on the spur of the moment. And will this bill be amended to say that resorts and properties must put something on their website to inform persons who are CCW carriers who they can write or email or call if they want to get that express written permission?
Assemblywoman, this is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts for the record. Just to clarify, the permission that is contemplated in the legislation and the permission that is contemplated on the signage is written permission. My point was that any guest can ask our employees where they can get the appropriate permissions, and they will be directed to the right place to get the appropriate permissions. In terms of when they should do that as soon as they become aware that they do or intend to have a firearm on the property in contravention of our policy. So if they are aware that they will be traveling with a firearm and they need to bring that in the property, then they should call in advance and they should find out how to get the appropriate permissions or what the policies are with regard to turning over that firearm at the time that they are that they will come onto property. And I should know, and as I've noted previously, this already is our policy. So our frequent guests already are aware of this. As for those guests who are visiting our property for the first time and are not aware of the policy, this bill is not intended to go after, as I've noted, people that are making an honest mistake or unaware. And the bill does, again, contemplate that if they only become aware once they are on property, say they park in the garage, and because under this bill, signage will be required to be posted at every entrance, as well as a check-in, as well as behind as well as at the cages. At that point, they become aware that they are carrying a firearm in contravention of our policy. At that point, they can engage with our employees and find out what steps they need to take in order to at that point cure the violation. So they can either turn over the firearm, as our customers already do when they come onto property and realize at that point that they're violating our policy, or they can seek written permission. So there is ample opportunity to, in the circumstance that you were describing, there's ample opportunity for them to seek permission in advance. There's ample opportunity for them to seek permission at the time that they come onto property in violation of that policy.
So just one follow-up, Assemblywoman Lisa Krasner. Let's say I am aware of the law because I went through this hearing and I am a CCW carrier, not confirming or denying, just hypothetical, and I want to comply in advance. When I went to your website, there's nowhere where I can write or email. It does not give me an email address or an address. It doesn't give me any direction. And I'm just wondering if that will be included in this, that directs resort properties to put something on their website so a law-abiding citizen knows what to do.
So I think this question has already been asked, and I'm going to ask that we move on if you have any other questions. All right, seeing no other questions, we will move on to Assemblywoman Hansen.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. I'm grateful that I'm able to ask some questions. I have several, but I'll try to keep it short. I'm trying to address, Ms. Molino, numerous times you've stated that we already do this, but that you need one more tool, that you need this bill for that purpose. And I'm not seeing that play out yet. As I look back, I looked up an article, it's been referenced some of the violence that's occurred on the Strip in the last year. When I looked back at some of the news articles, there was one from the Las Vegas Sun and what some of the other resorts are doing currently without this bill. They've enhanced their security measures. They're using metal detectors. They are the Cosmopolitan partnered with Metro Police starting 2 weeks ago, this was in October, to station officers at every entrance and assist with resort security. They also said that on Fridays and Saturdays, they only, they have a certain screening process. They screen bags. They use the metal detectors. And so I'm just not understanding, to me, this is such a broad net that there are mechanisms in place for security. Some of these shootings have occurred outside, not in covered areas. Some were on the freeway right near the Strip. I still need to be convinced that this broad net is not going to target the very people that are law-abiding to go after bad actors that when they are committed to do violence, we're going to want to have armed security guards in a building, CCW holders in the building, and law enforcement off-duty officers with their weapons as our safety net. So can you tell me what teeth you need that, say, the Wynn or the Cosmopolitan, some of these others, that they're practicing now that you're not able to do?
Assemblywoman, I think that we all share the same goal, which is that we all want to see incidences of violence minimized in our communities and certainly on the Las Vegas Strip. And like I've said numerous times, ultimately, that is the goal of this bill. What we have chosen to do as MGM Resorts is we have chosen to enact a policy that makes clear that our properties, our private properties, are properties that are firearm-free zones. What the law does currently is it requires our security guards to engage with individuals who violate our policy to engage with them and provide them with verbal notice before they can be trespassed from our property. What the bill is seeking to do is in certain instances, give our security guards the ability to engage with law enforcement before they are required to give a verbal notice. And so what this does is already under Nevada law, private property owners can trespass individuals for any variety of purposes. It's private property after all. And at the end of the day, consistent with other laws like public accommodation law, et cetera, we can enact policies that keep individuals who we don't believe should be on the property off of the property. But what all this bill allows us to do is it allows us to engage with law enforcement without a verbal warning in certain circumstances. And we believe that in certain circumstances, that additional tool can help all of our properties, those who desire to opt into this, can help to reduce potential incidences of violence on our property. That's the law as it exists, and that's what this particular bill, that's how this particular bill would enhance that law in a way that we think would benefit our property and other properties that opt in and help reduce incidences of violence or the potential violence on those properties.
Just a quick follow-up. Are you able to ban people from your properties as it is? If you notice the suspicious actions of an individual, they don't respond, you ask them to leave. I'm just curious, how do you handle the things now? And if somebody doesn't comply with your rules that exist now, do you, as a resort, have the ability to ban an individual, kind of like, you have, is it the famous the blacklist, where you have individuals who've maybe cheated that you can keep out of the resort? Can you do that if they don't comply with existing laws?
So, Assemblywoman, as I noted, the way that the existing law works is that as a private property owner, we do have the authority to prevent individuals who carry firearms onto our property in contravention of our policies. We do have the ability to trespass them from our properties. The way that works right now is that we have to give them a verbal warning if they refuse to comply with our request to either turn over the firearm to leave the property. If they refuse, at that point, we can call law enforcement and ask law enforcement for assistance in removing that individual from our property. What we cannot do right now is trespass an individual with a firearm without engaging with them with a verbal warning. And so what this bill is seeking to do is to close that gap.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. And I also just want to remind you guys that after you ask the question, if you leave your microphone button on, that's what causes the garbled responses from people on Zoom. So just make sure that you turn your mic off and on as you're asking your questions. Assemblymember O'Neill, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the time. I have one question actually for you, Chair. Do you know if we have Metro representatives coming on to testify? Because I'd really like to hear more about these alleged crimes that were reported by Assemblywoman Howdigy and how many of them concern the resorts were on the Strip, how many concern legal gun owners, et cetera, and how they prioritize their response to the resorts now.
I do not believe we have anybody from Metro here today, but we could certainly reach out to them and follow up with you.
I would appreciate that. And we've talked about several things so far. And I guess I still haven't gotten a clear answer about the time you first realize somebody or you think somebody has a concealed weapon, and you say you want to engage with law enforcement. Well, law enforcement is going to prioritize calls. I will tell you, a robbery takes precedence over a person that you think has a CCW. A shooting has precedence someplace else. It goes down the list. Law enforcement prioritizes. So we haven't really gotten a clear answer to what you do during that time. Do you have 6 guards follow the person around while you're waiting to engage? But let's move on from that. You also have said that firearms, the signs are there saying no firearms. So you're telling the person what they can't do. I don't see anything telling the person what they can do. That the law enforcement officer who has an HR 218 and is allowed to travel across state lines and carry a concealed weapon, there's nothing telling him where to go, what to do. I know they're not going to carry around the NRSs with them when they come up from Arizona. You also talk about firearms. When I worked undercover in narcotics, I used to carry a Bowie knife with me. I can tell you, you can have my firearm any day of the week, put me in at your 21 table with my Bowie knife, and you will have 6 dead ones before your unarmed security guards can engage. That's a fact. So that's not addressed at all either. But let's actually get down to my question, if I may. So I'm a law-abiding person. You ask me if I have a firearm. I say, yes, I do. You say, well, you're not allowed to. I say, well, what can I do? Well, you must give me that firearm so I can hold it until you leave the premise. Well, if I'm not mistaken, the 2019 legislature passed a bill that says you're not allowed to give your firearm to anybody unless they're an immediate family member. So now we've created a law. Now we've created new criminals known as the security guards or whoever is receiving that to give the firearm back to me. There's supposed to be a ATF 4473 transpired. Where are these procedures here? I don't see it in this statute being proposed of SB 452. Can someone answer that for me, please?
Chair Scheibel, through you to the Assemblyman Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. So first, I would note that I guess I'll answer your question about what to do, what you would do with the firearm. I think that there is also the option that Ms. Molino has talked about where they're asked to leave the premises if they want to have their firearm, or they can walk it back to their car. Additionally, there are a number of circumstances. For example, if you were to go to if you were a law enforcement officer or CCW carrier and you had a firearm and you were to go to visit someone in the Clark County Detention Center, you can't bring that firearm in with you, but they can store it for you. They can take it and store it for you. In fact, even if you're a law enforcement officer, they're going to take that and they're going to store it for you. That doesn't violate the legislation that was passed in 2019 with respect to background checks. That relates to the transfer of firearms and what is required when someone transfers a firearm to another individual. So that is not how that law reads, and it wouldn't require for if a covered premises were going to adopt policies to store firearms, that law does not kick in because that's not what that law does. So I think that's a little bit of an inaccurate reading of what exactly the background check law was, and that's certainly not what's being litigated here today. What is in this bill, and again, I would note that this is very similar to what we have for schools. It is similar to what we have for libraries. It is similar to what happens in this very building, that you cannot bring firearms onto the premises. So I think one of the difficult parts, and maybe one of the frustrations over the questions that are being asked numerous times and then being answered and there being frustration about it, is that this is not a new concept. This isn't a law that doesn't exist in other places where we have said that there should be some safety and security built into facilities. This is something that says, here's what we can do. We can, if we choose, as a covered premises, to prohibit firearms on the property. If we do that, here are some of the parameters for what that looks like. Policies and procedures will, of course, support those, and it is but a tool for when law enforcement may need to engage. And of course, law enforcement is always going to prioritize. But we don't say that we're not going to, we're going to say, well, if law enforcement is only responding to the most serious crime and then there's nothing else that they should never respond to, we're just never going to pass any laws about that. Because ultimately, the whole goal here, right, is that if law enforcement is needed in order to help de-escalate a situation, that they have that as a tool. I think the important piece to note here is that this is very similar to how other premises operate that prohibit firearms. And I think to Senator Donyate's point that I thought was quite a good one with respect to how you build information and how you build public knowledge about how to address situations. We are either assuming that individuals are operating in bubbles where they have never been to another public place where they have not been told that they can't bring certain things in. If you go to a hockey game, you can't bring in certain, sometimes you have to have a clear purse. You can't even bring in a purse with other things in it. Sometimes you can't even bring a bag at all. People adapt to those situations. This is not an absurd situation that doesn't exist in other places. We prohibit guns on schools in the same fashion. We prohibit guns in libraries in the same fashion. We prohibit guns in this very building, and people are perfectly capable of complying with that, and that's what this particular bill is. And I think that's some of the frustration with some of the questions that continue to be answered about, well, what are we going to do about this? There are different pieces built in here, right, to address some of those concerns with respect to, well, what if somebody's there for a trade show and purchases a weapon? Well, they have to get consent. What if they're a law enforcement officer? Then they're exempted by the bill. What are we going to do to make sure that the individuals from the properties who are dealing with folks who maybe have a weapon on property, well, we're going to make sure they have these policy and procedures and these trainings in place. How are we going to notify folks? Well, we're going to make sure there are signs on property at all the entrances, at check-in, and at the cashier's cages, so that people are aware that that is something that they cannot do.
I appreciate Senator Canizaro to your response, but I don't think you actually are dealing with it. When you go into the courthouse, you go through a metal detector. I've gone through the metal detector into the courthouses. I identify myself as a law enforcement officer. They'll ask me, are you carrying? Yes. We've got lock boxes right here under guard. Would you put your weapon in there? I do that. I have the key. There is no master key. I haven't heard any of that discussed here in this bill. And as I said, it tells me what I can't do. There's no information what I can do. When I walk into that casino, when I walk into that premise, I'm not going through a metal detector apparently. You have not addressed that for me. You've also not addressed, as I said, other weapons. And when I worked undercover, I carried the Bowie knife. I've seen what can be done with a knife, whether a large or small. I can get into details if you'd like me to for it, but I don't think it's necessary. So I think we're just beating around. And I disagree with you. When I put that firearm someplace in the casino, because I do want to stay there and give them my money and hopefully maybe win a few back, I have no control over that firearm. And I disagree with you on what was done in 2019. I have no control over that firearm. I think it does require a ATF 4473 action on both parts, when I surrender it and then when I get it back. So I think we're just beating around the bush. I don't want to take up any more time. I appreciate it, Chair. Thank you.
All right. Other questions from committee members? Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong?
Thank you, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee for being here on a Saturday, and thank you for your presentation, Senator Canizaro and Senator Donate. I think what is concerning is that all of the places that have been mentioned where there are processes in place are they're public buildings. There are, it's already been well noted that there are scans downstairs. This is a public building. In the courthouse, I worked in one for several years. It's a public building. Those processes are in place. These rules, this law that you are trying to present today, that you are presenting today, has to do with private business. So my first question to Ms. Molino is, what prohibits the MGM from hiring professional armed security to handle the issue of dealing with those who might be carrying weapons in contradiction to your policies on your premises? Could you please answer that?
Assemblywoman Molino with MGM Resorts, for the record. So In response to that question, what we are trying to get at here, and I know I've said this a number of times, but is a situation where our security guards believe that de-escalation on their own is not an appropriate response, and what they need is additional assistance from law enforcement. And so there will be a narrow set of circumstances where our security guards believe that that is the case. And to the point made earlier from Senator Dunyate's friendly amendment, there is specific language in that particular amendment that goes directly, I think, to one of the issues that you've raised, which is the ability of the resort to handle this on its own without going to law enforcement. And de-escalation techniques are built into that. We support that. But again, what we're trying to get at here is not the question necessarily of whether the response from our facility is through an armed guard or an unarmed guard, but rather our security guards believe that the situation is such where violence could be imminent in a manner that they believe that law enforcement assistance is necessary. And it provides them with the option to engage that law enforcement assistance where they believe that de-escalation by the property itself will not be an effective solution to mitigating the potential that a violent situation could occur.
Thank you. So what you are saying is that you all do not want to be responsible for de-escalation, but that you would like our law enforcement to come on property, private property, and to be responsible for de-escalation on private property. And wait, let me finish, because I've heard several, I've been sitting here, and I apologize for being late. I had a rough night. So I've heard several explanations. So there's no fiscal note here to talk about how this is going to affect policing in our communities if we have police that are responding to your internal issues. There's no explanation here about, I think Senator Donate used the example of education, enforcement, and engineering, and that is a public policy procedure. But yet, the education piece of that is being woefully ignored. There's no commitment from your organization to put into this law a requirement for education. There is no commitment from your organization to put into this policy, into this law, a commitment for engineering, but only that we are required to have our police do the enforcement on your behalf. I went to Southwest Airlines website, and they have a fact sheet that says before you travel, and in that it tells every traveler, and every time you book a ticket with Southwest, you get a ping, and it says before you travel, don't forget your mask, don't forget you can't carry a firearm. Don't forget that you can't have water. It gives you all the things. That's education, and that is engineering. I do not see any of that inside this law, and I don't hear from you or anyone else a commitment to do those things so that we don't have people getting caught up in this. We've talked about this before. This is nothing new. You and I have had several conversations. I am very concerned about what I believe this leads to, which is stop and frisk. And it is concerning that there is no commitment. Oh, and by the way, in case anybody doesn't know, there are 172 locations in City of Las Vegas, City of North Las Vegas, and Henderson that have unrestricted gaming licenses. There is nothing in this law that specifically requires all of them to receive the same, to provide the same education to the public, the same engineering to the public, meaning that all of them would have to put this on their website so that anyone who is visiting any location would know what the do's and don'ts are, where they can store their weapon, how they approach to have their weapon locked up. If there are, there's nothing. And so I'm just really, really concerned about the ability for there to be misinterpretation, and then we have people caught up. And to the point that Assemblywoman Bill Bray said earlier, when we don't have a demand for a verbal warning, we are going to have situations where Black folks and brown folks are going to be the ones who are going to be not asked to leave, but who are going to be the ones that the police are called on. And I'm very concerned about that because I have a commitment to my community that I do everything that I can that tries to keep them safe. We know that every single time there is an interaction with police for Black and brown people, the opportunity for it to go sideways is grand, and we just don't want that. And without a commitment for there to be notice as part of the policy, and not a policy, but actually the law, because policies change depending on who's in charge. So there needs to be some more meat as far as education, enforcement, and engineering are concerned as far as, for me. Thank you.
This is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts, for the record, and Assemblywoman, certainly I understand your concerns and your desires to make sure that this bill in no way creates a disparate impact. I'd just like to address a few of the points that you made, which I think are important ones. First of all, in the friendly amendment that Senator Dignate offered, there are specific requirements that unrestricted licensees that opt in provide required training to their security guards around de-escalation techniques, diversity training, and implicit bias. And so in terms of the required training, the three categories that Senator Dignate articulated are not just required as a matter of policy, they are required as a matter of law. So we are not asking that police perform de-escalation on our behalf. In fact, our security guards will be required to understand de-escalation techniques as a condition of our ability to opt in to this statute if it's enacted. Second, with regard to your note that police would be responding to internal issues, I don't think that's the case here. What police would be responding to was incidences where there is a potential of violent engagement on our property, and I think we all are aligned in wanting to reduce any incidents of violence that would occur in densely populated areas like our properties are. The third point that I'd like to note is that with regard to our security guards themselves, it is not a homogenous workforce. It is a very diverse workforce. We have a majority minority population amongst our security guards. 60% of our workforce is diverse. And fourth, with regard to the example that you gave of Southwest and their ability to provide that sort of warning, it is a very different circumstance, of course. We are places of public accommodation that are where our doors are open to the public. We don't provide boarding passes. We don't have that sort of direct ability to provide a written warning to every individual that comes onto our property. People come in just for dinner. They come in to play on the casino floor. They come in to buy something. They come in to go to the spa. They come in for any variety of reasons where we aren't providing them with, where they're not engaging with us first through a website. They're, staying somewhere else, or they live in town and they're just coming onto our property. And so the circumstances and our ability to engage with our customer base is very different because we are much more expansive to the extent that we are open to the public in a way that an airline, for example, isn't. We do have that with regard to the training that would be required, Senator Dignate's friendly amendment adopted. That is something that we would take very seriously in its required components for diversity training, as well as for implicit bias training, as well as for de-escalation.
Ms. Molino, does the MGM have a website?
We do.
Do your restaurants inside of your hotel have websites?
Some of them, well, there
Generally
are landing
speaking.
pages. I'm sorry?
Generally speaking, do the restaurants, the spa, the barber shop, the coffee house, do those places either have websites of their own, generally speaking, or are their notices encapsulated on your website?
Assemblywoman, this is actually for the record, I was not attempting to circumvent the question. I was actually trying to think through how it works. I believe they have landing pages within our homepage. So I believe that if you want to go to, for example, if you want to go to Catch, let's say, you can navigate there through the ARIA website, is I believe the way it works.
So what I'm saying, Ms. Molino, is MGM would be the mothership, and these other smaller businesses would have landing pages with information about where they're located, a map, how I could get to the spa, and then afterwards go get my coffee or whatever. So if MGM is the mothership and MGM put the information about your policies on your website, whether there was a follow-up ping, if someone booked something or not, it doesn't matter. If MGM and any other non-restricted licensed gaming establishment that wants to participate in this is required to put that information on their website, a lot of this would be solved because it would answer all of the questions that have been provided earlier. Ms. Krasner said, so a person can know where to apply. Mr. O'Neill said, where a person would know where they would store the weapon or who to turn the weapon into. A person attending the SHOT Show would understand how much time they had to get that unloaded weapon to a particular space, to have it locked up legally so they wouldn't get in trouble. So a person who traveled across the country, as was mentioned by Ms. Cohen, would know that they can't take their weapon inside unless they get permission, and they would know where to go. So when MGM or any other unrestricted gaming facility puts this information out there, you are allowing anyone in the public to have one spot to get data. And then if you have to ask someone, you can point to that. But I believe that it is the responsibility of the mothership who is coming to us asking for this law to make a commitment to inform the public, the entire public. If it's on the website, anybody can ask. And I don't see that in here. I only see some vague policies and procedures. Again, that could change with the new leadership. Thank you, Madam Chair.
If I may address the question, if I may address that point, this is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts for the record. Assemblywoman, we do not have an objection to a requirement that as a condition of opt-in, we would be required to have a page on our policies that outline, a page on our website that outlined our policy. We would be happy to accept an amendment that required that as a condition of opting in.
Thank you for that. Assemblymember Kasama.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the presenters. My question is, this bill is for non-restricted gaming properties. And on those properties, we also have condo hotels. So we have people that, for example, the signature towers. So we have people that own the units individually there. In the bill here, under Section 8, B2, there's a section there regarding residential unit owners are exempted and that they can carry the firearms to his or her unit, and there's some information on that. So my question is that many of those owners put those units in rental pools, or they have them with Airbnb. So if the owner is allowed, because there's no mention of how that would work, so if the owner is allowed to carry the weapons, and if they decide to rent out those units, then is the tenant or the short-term occupant for the weekend, are they exempted if the owner is allowing that? There's no clarity on that, and I think that really needs to be addressed because there is a lot of those units down on the Strip.
This is Aisha Molino with MGM Resorts for the record. Thank you for that question. The way that the bill is contemplated is that the owner himself or herself is exempted from the bill as a matter of the statute itself. With regard to guests of those facilities, it is MGM Resorts in its entirety is a gun-free zone, and so it is our policy that we do not want any firearms on our premises. To the extent that an individual who owns a condo within our facilities is renting out one of those condos, and they are renting it to a person who is carrying a firearm on the premise, that person would be subject to this statute as it is drafted. So to the extent that that person is already covered by an exemption, that exemption would apply. To the extent that that person would like to get written permission from the owner or the operator or an agent, one of our authorized agents, that person may do so. To the extent that that person brings a firearm onto the property and at that point realizes that firearms are not generally permitted, that person may turn it over to an agent of our property, as is permitted in this bill. So again, there are ample opportunities for a individual who is renting out a condo on our premises to seek an exemption or turn over that firearm consistent with the provisions of the bill.
So you're saying that a tenant or short-term occupant for the weekend would not be covered under the owner's exemption. But what about an owner's relative? They have their brother coming and staying with them. I just think that we need to have that clarity in this bill because I don't think that's very clear.
So as I noted, the bill does contain an exemption for an individual owner. To the extent that an individual who is bringing a firearm onto the premises is not the owner, then that person would be covered by the bill as any other resident or guest of the resort.
All right, thank you. Other questions from the committee? Assemblymember Gonzalez?
Thank you so much, Chair. Majority Leader Cananzaro, Senator Dunyate, and Assemblywoman Hadigi, thank you so much for this bill. I know that there's been a lot of work going into this. I just have a few questions, and I think a lot of my concerns have already been addressed. I think that I'm still very confused and concerned with a lot of what my colleagues have stated. I was curious, there has been a lot of talk about, guns on the strip. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong brought up that there are other businesses and entities that fall into this non-restricted gaming license. On Section 4, it talks about de-escalation. So I was just curious, what are your de-escalation policies? I don't think we've had that conversation. It also says that there needs to be a requirement for cultural diversity, competency, and implicit bias training. Those all mean separate things, and I'm just concerned and confused on what that means to what business and what training that means. We've seen across the country that, even police departments have these policies and we're still having, deadly interactions with people. And so I'm just really concerned. So maybe we could just start with where is the de-escalation policies? I think you also stated that this is an enhancement tool. So what are other tools that your business is using to address this issue?
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. So with regard to our existing training, we have an entire training manual that our employees are required to abide by in terms of understanding how to treat our guests. So with regard to making sure that none of our policies are applied to our guests in a disparate way, that is something, again, that we take very, very seriously. And so they're required to go through diversity training. They're required to go through training that makes sure that they're aware that every single guest must be treated in the exact same manner. And that is with regard to all of our policies, not just this policy. Senator Dunyate's friendly amendment includes additional provisions that would require us to provide training on de-escalation, cultural diversity, and implicit bias. And that's not because MGM Resorts does not undertake that to date, but it's because in order to opt in as a condition of this particular bill, every single property that does would be required to implement those policies. And I can't speak for other properties that would desire to opt in to know whether they currently do so or not. But it's to ensure that there is a minimum baseline of that sort of training across the board. In terms of the enhancements that you referenced, Assemblywoman, as noted, the way that the law currently works is that in order for our agents to remove an individual from our property who is violating our existing policy that MGM Resorts is a firearm-free zone, they must engage with that individual and provide a verbal warning before law enforcement can be called. What this does in those circumstances where our security guards believe that that they need firearm assistance in order to prevent a violent situation from unfolding on our property, it allows them to call for law enforcement assistance without providing that verbal warning. That is not to say that in every incident they will, but it is to provide that option so that we can make sure that our resorts continue to be as safe a place as possible.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez, District 16 for the record. Thank you so much for that. I think I'm still really concerned. You can only speak to MGM policies and procedures, and so we're allowing over hundreds of businesses to opt into this policy. We don't know what their training is. We don't know who's doing their training. We don't have a standard training for everyone that will be opting into this policy. For your business, how often are people doing these trainings? Is it like you first get hired and that's your implicit bias training? Are there reoccurring trainings? I have a lot of concerns about this training, or saying, hey, we do this training and so now we're all good to go and nobody has implicit bias. We all have implicit bias, right? So I just have a lot of concerns around that.
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. Assemblywoman, again, I can only speak to our policy. Our policy is annual at a minimum for our trainings.
Thank you so much. My last question. So is the issue right now that Metro is not responding to these trespassing calls? I'm also just concerned on I guess, how this provides more teeth to an issue that you already have the ability to call Metro for. Thank you.
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. And Assemblywoman, I think you've highlighted what exactly the problem is. The problem is that we don't have the ability to call Metro unless we've provided a verbal warning. So even in an incident where our security guard believes, for example, that violence could be imminent because an individual is carrying a firearm, our security guard cannot call Metro for assistance unless our security guard first engages with that individual and provides a verbal warning. So that's even where, for whatever the other context might be, for whatever the other circumstances might be, there is a reasonable belief that this situation could turn violent imminently. Under existing trespass law, our security guards have to provide a verbal warning and directly engage with that individual. So, again, there is a narrow gap here, but it's an important gap, and that is the gap that this bill is seeking to resolve.
Okay, just to be clear, so we are seeking to address an issue that may or may not happen. We don't know, or have there been any examples where someone didn't want to leave after you approached them and then it became violent? I mean, we had a lot of examples of shootings on the Strip, right, of the uptake in violence, but my question is, how many times have you approached an individual with a verbal warning where they didn't want to leave and it then became a violent situation?
Assemblywoman, this is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. What I can tell you is that there have been circumstances where we have sought to trespass individuals because they have refused to leave the premises after a verbal warning.
Okay, thank you. I think I still have a lot of questions and concerns, and I would love to discuss offline. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Other questions? Assemblymember Ornlicker.
Thank you, Chair, and David Orentlicker, Assembly District 20 in east side of Las Vegas. And Henderson, thank you, Senators, for bringing this bill. I'm curious about the covered premises definition, as Assemblywomen Gonzalez and Summers Armstrong have mentioned, it has a fair amount of breadth. And as I look at a list that I found on the Nevada Gaming Control Board, if I've got the right lists, included in non-restricted license locations are an Albertsons on South Rainbow, several Vaughn's groceries, Dottie's, a Smith's on North Rainbow. And the focus of this has been on casino resorts and the violence there and the assurance to tourists. So, but the definition of covered premises seems to get a different universe, and the line between restricted and non-restricted, is it true that it's more dangerous to go to a Smith's than to a CVS or a 7-Eleven, and that it's more dangerous to go to a gaming establishment than a non-gaming establishment? So why is it so broad? I could imagine you could, borrowing from another bill we're considering, instead of saying non-restricted license, you could say non-restricted license associated with a hotel that has at least 175 rooms, as we've seen in another bill. So why is the definition, doesn't seem connected to the purpose of the bill?
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts, for the record. The bill is intended to get at a particular set of circumstance, right? And the particular set of circumstances, the one that we've been discussing here today. The definition of covered premises when this bill first started was much broader than what it is in this bill, and it covered all sorts of different real property that could potentially be impacted. The bill was narrowed to cover only a particular subset of private property, unrestricted licensees, in large part to address a lot of the concerns that have been raised during the course of this conversation today, which is to make sure that the bill is not overly expansive, to make sure that the bill can be implemented in a way and by private property owners that do have a lot of the elements in place that have been raised with regard to, for example, diversity training, et cetera, to make sure that any sort of disparate impact that this bill might realize is mitigated to the extent possible. To the question of whether it should be further narrowed to include only a certain subset of non-restricted licensees, what I can tell you as from MGM Resorts' perspective, we would not have an issue with that. I can't speak with others, but from our perspective, there is no substantive concern there.
All right, thank you. I am not seeing any other questions from any members of the committee, so I just want to clarify a couple of things, and I actually wanted to get legal to weigh in here because we have been focused on these trespassing warnings and calling police for trespassing, and I'm wondering if there is anywhere else in the law that the concept of requiring a verbal warning before a private individual is allowed to contact law enforcement. Does that exist elsewhere in the Nevada revised statutes?
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Nick Anthony from the Legal Division. For the record, I am not aware that any other warning is required currently under law. Typically, if a crime is being committed, a property owner or anybody else who witnesses the crime could immediately call law enforcement for assistance prior to giving a warning.
Okay, thank you. And so then that leads into my second question for the presenters, which is my understanding is that the issue right now is that because this violation of policy only rises to the level of a trespass, that once the policy has been violated in those unusual but especially dangerous circumstances where somebody's unwilling to comply, you're kind of out of options once they refuse to comply because they're not in violation of the law, they're only in violation of the policy. And so to call the police would be a trespass violation, but there's no underlying prohibited conduct occurring. And so this would give you the teeth that you need to ensure that people are not bringing firearms onto your property, and if they are, that you can respond accordingly. Am I understanding that right?
This is Aisha Molina with MGM Resorts for the record. That's exactly right, Madam Chair.
Okay, And then the one other thing that I wanted to clarify with the bill sponsor and the sponsor of the amendment is that the intention here is to mirror the language that we utilize for schools and libraries. And so the way that those exceptions work, the way that people can receive permission to carry would be the same. And it's my understanding that that's because we have probably more people entering casinos every single day than we do our libraries, perhaps, unfortunately, but they are places of public accommodation, and this is a policy choice to say that they are places that have children at them and have families at them and visitors at them and people who deserve that kind of protection that we also afford to schools and libraries. Is that accurate?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. That is correct. Obviously, in this language, we've also included some additional parameters to ensure that things like training are taking place and that those types of policies for de-escalation, cultural diversity, competency, and racial profiling are included. And then, of course, some unique circumstances for like residential unit owners. But yes, that is the intent.
All right, thank you. That covers all of our questions. So we will move on to testimony. I'll note for the record that it is now 11:40, which means that we will take support testimony until 12:40. I also want to let everybody know that we will not be taking a recess during testimony. So I hope that you will have patience with our members if they have to step out to use the restroom, grab a sip of water or something like that. But I don't want to delay the hearing for any of that. So instead, we will go directly into support testimony. We will start with anybody present in the room who would like to give testimony. And I don't see anybody in the room coming forward, so we will go directly to broadcast, please, for testimony in support of SB 452. What? Oh, are you here to testify in support? All right, so we will go to broadcast for testimony in support, and each caller will have 2 minutes maximum, not a minimum.
Thank you very much, Chair Scheibel. To testify in support on Senate Bill 452, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in support on Senate Bill 452, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 767. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today to testify in support of SB 452. My name is Nida Alvi, first name Nida, last name Alvi, and I'm currently counsel at Everytown for Gun Safety, the largest gun violence prevention organization in the country, with nearly 6 million supporters, including moms, mayors, survivors, students, and everyday Americans who are fighting for common sense gun safety measures that can help save lives. In October 2017, Nevada experienced the deadliest mass shooting in modern history when a gunman opened fire on a concert in Las Vegas and in a matter of minutes killed 58 people and injured over 400. Since this horrific tragedy, the Las Vegas Strip has seen a drastic increase in gun violence in the past few years. Under current Nevada law, the rules for businesses that choose to prohibit guns on their property are vague. This bill will provide clear rules for certain businesses that wish to prohibit both open and concealed carry of guns from their property, ensuring that law enforcement officers have the tools they need to enforce the law. Open carry is a dangerous policy. Research shows that the presence of a visible gun makes people more aggressive. It is exploited by white supremacists and opposed by law enforcement and the public. Furthermore, we know that guns and alcohol don't mix. There is strong evidence that people under the influence of alcohol are at an elevated risk of violent behavior, including gun violence. The public recognizes this danger and overwhelmingly opposes allowing people to bring guns into establishments where alcohol is consumed. Nevadans deserve to be protected against the threat of gun violence in the Las Vegas Strip and casinos and other establishments. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And if you've recently joined us this morning, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 452. If you'd like to provide support testimony at this time, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 525. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good morning, committee. My name is Jim Sullivan, JIMSULLIVAM, and I'm representing the Culinary Union. The Culinary Union supports SB 452, its proposed amendment from Senator Donate, because allowing firearms in casinos and hotels is a worker safety issue. While the Culinary Union supports legal and responsible gun ownership, we also believe all workers deserve to be protected from gun violence at work, and SB 452 will help make that a reality. The bill would not discourage or prevent legal gun ownership and does not impede on responsible gun ownership. The bill includes common sense measures which give businesses the option to protect their employees and guests from gun violence in their own facilities. During the October 1st shooting in 2017, thousands of Culinary Union members saw firsthand the effects of gun violence. 5 Culinary Union members were injured in the mass shooting, and countless other workers suffered PTSD after that tragic incident. The Culinary Union wants to ensure that no hospitality worker ever has to experience that trauma again. Gun violence on the Las Vegas Strip and downtown could threaten the economic recovery Nevada desperately needs. More than a year since the beginning of the pandemic, the Culinary Union has approximately 50% of workers still unemployed, as the state's #1 industry, hospitality, was hardest hit during the pandemic. Economic recovery won't be possible without workers getting back to work and being safe while at work. SB 542 will protect workers and accelerate Nevada's economic recovery. Lastly, we hear and understand the concerns regarding this bill. As an organization committed to both social justice and worker safety, we did not come to this support easily. And I want to be clear. As the largest organization of immigrants, of Black, Latinx, and AAPI workers in Nevada, the Culinary Union is anti-racist and against all forms of racism and oppression. Our 86-year history in Nevada is filled with crucial fights for equality as we ensure working families are treated with respect and dignity. We will hold those accountable for equity and will continue to challenge and confront racism in the workplace, including how this law is enforced. We urge you to support and pass SB 542 with Senator Donate's proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And once again, for those of you that have recently joined us this morning, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 452. If you'd like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair Scheibel, at this time, there are no more callers to provide support testimony.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Kyle, for your help. We will move to testimony in opposition to SB 452. Can I just get a show of hands, people in the room planning to testify? Okay. So here's the way this is going to work. You can come down to the table 2 at a time. You don't have to be friends. And each person will get 2 minutes maximum, not a minimum. And first come, first serve. All right. Come on up for opposition testimony to SB 452.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the Joint Committee. For the record, my name is Troy Scrumey. I am the Vice Chairman of the Las Vegas Police Managers and Supervisors Association. Today I'm here in opposition of SB 452. This bill only exempts members of law enforcement that are on duty at the time that they are on property. Therefore, this bill explicitly criminalizes active qualified law enforcement officers from carrying concealed while off duty. The Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act of 2004 addressed the topic of officers meeting the definition of qualified officers to legally carry concealed in all 50 states, notwithstanding the state law. While there is provisions in the law that apply to private entities creating rules to disallow such conduct, the spirit of that law is to ensure law enforcement can carry lawful firearms for the purpose of protecting themselves, their families, and based on the natures of their jobs. Criminalizing such behavior with this bill is creating unnecessary dangers to our police professionals in our state. I have been in law enforcement for over 20 years in Las Vegas. On multiple occasions while off duty, I have happened across individuals in the capacity of an officer that I have arrested, including some that have served prison time based on investigations I was involved in. On one of those occasions, I was confronted by an individual while my child was with me. I am thankful that none of these occasions resulted in a physical altercation, and I did not have to use my firearm, but I'm certainly thankful I had it with me. Additionally, this bill will inevitably increase interactions between police and otherwise suspected armed, law-abiding citizens. Contacts such as these have the chance of being an emotionally charged interaction that I believe should be unnecessary. As we have seen in the media, when those interactions result in tragic outcomes, the police bear the brunt of the public outrage. I encourage this committee to vote no on SB 452. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel, members of the Joint Committee. My name is John Abel. I'm a police officer who represents the Las Vegas Police Protective Association. I'm here today to testify in opposition to SB 452. This proposed legislation creates the potential of an armed confrontation between normally law-abiding citizens and law enforcement officers inside crowded businesses, which is very dangerous. I've studied the proposed amendment, and the language still does not take away that danger of potential armed confrontation between law enforcement officers and citizens. We live in a time where we are trying to limit a police officer's use of deadly force against all people. I think this bill goes in the opposite direction. And to answer your question, Assemblyman Wheeler, if someone says no and the police are called, they're going to come lights and sirens, and the police are called and told there is an armed person in the casino who is not listening to leave. And if there's probable cause, officers are going to respond and potentially prone them out in the middle of the casino at gunpoint and take them into custody. I don't think any of us want that. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Attar Hasibullah. I serve as the Executive Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada. The ACLU stands in firm opposition to Senate Bill 452. This simply isn't a bad bill that has good intentions. This is a potentially deadly bill with good intentions. No amendment to this bill, no matter how well-intended, can fix its potential outcomes. This bill is inherently unredeemable and is a pretense for dangerous and racist stop-and-frisk policies that have plagued our country and our state over the course of time. To illustrate that point, did any of you think that the ACLU, the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, the police unions, the National Rifle Association, and other groups would come together this last week of session on this type of bill? This is half-baked at best. This bill, as currently drafted, largely reflects language from a previously dead amendment in Assembly Bill 286, and it's been brought back in this new form the last week of session when it really shouldn't be. Look, I'm a person of color first and foremost. Before I'm executive director of the ACLU, before I'm an attorney, I'm a gun violence survivor. I've been shot at. I've also been detained by police 5 times in 3 jurisdictions. None of those were friendly. There were no practices related to de-escalation, and you heard no testimony from a single law enforcement agency today that spoke to their de-escalation tactics. This is a bill that, in effect, would provide private security for a private business like MGM. And if MGM wants to engage in hiring armed security, they can do so. The last I checked, they were not strapped for cash. We stand with our friends and members of the Culinary Union. We've represented them in First Amendment cases. And if they're encountering someone, an off-duty officer, who sees reasonable suspicion in the form of a bulge or an outline of a firearm in their pocket on the casino floor, and they are racially profiled as black and brown individuals, we will represent those individuals afterwards when they are accosted and searched unlawfully because there is a new crime that has been committed. This body
and you've reached 2 minutes. If you could wrap up, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just encouraging this committee, both of the committees, to take a better look at this, perhaps turn it into a study that's been done over and over and over to actually assess the proper way of implementing such a policy to prevent gun violence. Thank you.
Chair Scheibel and members of the committee, for the record, Dan Reed, Western Regional Director with the National Rifle Association, Institute for Legislative Action, here in strong opposition. And we're very proud to stand with this broad coalition of groups, as Attar with the ACLU just testified to and did so very eloquently about many of the issues. And I think the questions that came from the committee today really outlined many of the problems of this bill. There's a lot of uncertainty for people, how to comply, why this is truly necessary, and why MGM cannot take care of this security on their own without going into creating this new crime that ultimately would result in at least suspension or revocation of a CCW for someone who may have accidentally parked in the wrong parking lot or not been aware of the signage when they got onto that floor. We think this bill is wholly unnecessary, and it really could implicate a lot of good people, as well as residential unit owners or lessees on that land. I know residential owners are specifically covered in the original bill, and it's a little bit broader, but the amendment actually narrows that down even further. So it would specifically be to the owner, whether a family member, a significant other, a child, et cetera, who may be actually residing there, probably isn't going to fit into that definition, and they would be stripped of their ability to carry a firearm in and out. Also, it begs the question of how do you know if someone has permission? How do you not get into that situation, especially with the amendment where we're removing the warning language? They're not mandated by that. You've got to ask, why is the verbal warning that was at least in the original bill for some people taken out of the second bill? There's so many more issues, and at the end of the day, if this were to pass, there's no obligation on these private property owners, if they're going to exclude people, to increase their security measures on their own. And so for that and many other reasons, we're in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. John Pirro from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. We echo the comments of the ACLU that came before us. Gun violence is obviously a sticky issue, but we are concerned with some of the stop and frisk policies that this bill may put in place. We'd also like to welcome the NRA and the Nevada Firearms Coalition to stand with us on other stop and frisk issues that come up in the legislative body. But because of the ones that are a result of this bill, we are in opposition at this time.
Chair Scheibel, Chair Yeager, for the record, Randy Thompson, Nevada Firearms Coalition. Here in opposition, I'm just going to say ditto to what's been said before. Thank you.
Bruce Thompson, Carson City resident. A lot of what I had prepared has been covered up here, so I appreciate that. I got the opportunity to distill a lot of what I've heard. Of course, there's the cliche but truth that this bill will not affect anybody with illegal intent on their mind. This will not stop any of them from bringing guns into a casino. This only punishes by criminalizing normally law-abiding citizens. And an unarmed security presence in a casino is not going to do anything to guarantee my safety by disarming me and then having to wait for the police to show up. Further, the definition of covered property is any real property owned by someone with a non-restricted gaming license. Let's take the Atlantis Casino here in Reno as an example. They own 2 strip malls adjacent to the casino itself. There are many businesses that I would go into that have nothing to do with gaming that rent property from them. That suddenly makes me a criminal because I decided to go grocery shopping across the street from the Atlantis. There's nothing to delineate the casino from any other property that this license holder owns. And to me, that's not good. The crux of what this bill appears to be wanting to cover is allowing the casino operator to get the police there, make the call without having to do a verbal warning. Well, then great. Come back in 2023 and work on trespassing laws. Why assign a criminal penalty to legal carriers instead of going to the root cause of what you want to fix? What you really want to fix is we want to be able to call the police before we give anyone a verbal warning. Fine, then address that law. There's a lot that's been missing from this that you all have discussed. It's missing from this bill. Well, that's...
Reached 2 minutes, if you could wrap up, please.
That's the example of what happens when you rush something through as an emergency and don't properly write it. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Bill Bowen. I'm a resident of Nevada, Reno, Nevada, and I'm here in opposition as far as this bill. I wrote a letter to each and every one of you regarding my thoughts regarding this issue, and I won't take your time again to read that, but I'll give you an incident that happened to me a few years back when I was trying to go to a restaurant with my wife, and a person thought the parking place I was going in was in fact his, and within a short time he produced a meat cleaver and came at me with that meat cleaver. Yes, I was a CCW carrier and I have one in my wallet today. He was put on the ground, taken into custody, and all the rest of the stuff. With this bill, I believe that you're trying to victimize citizens of this community because they're unable to protect themselves. That where I go somewhere and I cannot have my CCW because someone has granted me not special dispensation to have my firearm with me, then I'm left unprotected. I know that you probably know these statistics, but I'm going to read them to you, is that during the year of 2020, Americans purchased about 23 million guns, an increase of 64% over 2019 sales, and 23% of those were women. Why are women doing this? There's protection orders and all kinds of other issues that they need to protect themselves. So if they go into a shopping mall and they have the sign up there that says they can't have a firearm, what happens to them? They can't protect themselves. Victims have seconds to defend themselves. They can't wait for the police that are sometimes 20 minutes away. I worked in law enforcement. I know that to be a fact. I also feel that we have an issue as far as the Constitution itself under Article 1, Section 2, and it basically says that every citizen has the right to keep and bear arms for security and defense, for lawful hunting and recreational uses, and for other lawful purposes.
And you've reached 2 minutes. If you could wrap up, please.
So as a CCW person, I'm basically told that all the training I went through and the process, it's no longer good. Somebody else decides. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Patrick Horgan, and I'm here representing myself. It seems to me that we are passing laws, very complicated laws, to control the lawless. The Crime Prevention Research Center, in a 2018 analysis, focused on mass public shootings from 1998 to 2018, reported 97.8% of incidents took place in gun-free zones. If you want to be proactive about this, you are eliminating the first line of defense. A more effective sign would probably be "Staff is armed and trained." If you really think laws will deter criminals, why don't you pass a law outlawing evil and be done with it and call it a good day and go home? You could probably pass it unanimously so the psychopaths would know that you really mean business. Thank you.
All right. I don't see anybody else coming to the table to get, oh, one more person. Go ahead. You have to turn on the microphone. And yeah, then give your name and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
All right. My name is Deontay. I'm representing my. It's lit. All right. Better? Cool. All right. Sorry about that. My name is Deontay. I'm representing myself. I'm here in opposition of SB 452. I'm in opposition because. Sorry about this. I'm so sorry. All right. So basically, we have watched the majority of our leadership be puppets for district attorneys in the MGM. Why is that we couldn't do this? Why couldn't we hear the death penalty AB as well as a joint session with this? Because these two are the most important things that are happening in our legislative. And unfortunately, it's too bad that folks in the death row don't have a hotel to buy politicians to speak up for their right to live. This bill, as well as all the other watered down police accountability bills, butchered the session once again, disproportionately put black and brown at risk and being killed for exercising their rights to bear arms. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I think we have concluded testimony from people in the room in opposition. So we will go to broadcast. Mr. Kyle, please, would you queue up the first person in opposition to SB 452.
Thank you so much, Chair Scheibel. To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 452, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in opposition on Senate Bill 452, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 318, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the Assembly and Senate Judiciary Committee. This is Kendra Birchie, BERTSCHY with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. We agree with the idea of finding ways to reduce gun violence on the Strip and across Nevada. We do disagree with the creation of this strict liability gross misdemeanor offense for an honest mistake or simply being unaware, because that's not a defense, because knowledge is not an element of this crime. As this bill is written and amended, someone who is already in violation, as in if they're on the property, asking for permission to be on the property with the firearm, they're already guilty of this gross misdemeanor. Our main issue has been already stated before from the other previous callers, but I would just note that the lack of a verbal warning is concerning, because sometimes people may miss signage or they may enter in an entrance where there is no signage, even though, you know, there's all the hopes of that happening. As members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee know, that happened to me when I showed up to try to testify for my first in-person hearing, where I went to the tent for the COVID tent and was told just to go to the back entrance, like I've done every single day last session. And unfortunately, that meant that I missed through the security checkpoint. I went into the committee room and then was removed. And luckily, the Capitol Police showed me enough grace to then tell me I just had to go through security. But if I was in one of the MGM properties, that instead of having Capitol Police nicely explain the situation, that could be a very dangerous and different situation put into play. I think all of us have been in some of that situations where we may just not have known the law or had an honest mistake, but those individuals would now be convicted of a gross misdemeanor. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 130, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. It may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINESAUNDERS. I'm the Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, here in opposition to Senate Bill 452. We too fear that Senate Bill 452 enables casinos to implement stop and frisk policies. We have seen from many other jurisdictions that these kind of tactics result in enormous racial disparities. In 2020, nearly 3/4 of the stops by the Metropolitan Police Department in D.C. were of Black people, despite that Black residents made up only 46% of the population. In 2011, 84% of the people stopped by the New York Police Department were Black and Latino residents, although they only comprise about 23% and 29% respectively. Our casinos are not immune to this kind of profiling. This bill will lead to increased encounters with law enforcement, which will be inherently dangerous and even deadly for Black and brown people. But there are other harmful effects of these types of practices. Recent data highlighted in a New York Times article has shown that students heavily exposed to stop and frisk were more likely to struggle in school, that young men were more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety and depression, that this exposure fostered cynicism in policing and government writ large, and that it made residents more likely to retreat from civic life. If we want to keep Nevada safe, we need to ensure that that includes protecting people of color from potentially harmful stop and frisk tactics. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And if you've recently joined our meeting this early afternoon, we are currently on opposition testimony for Senate Bill 452. If you'd like to provide opposition testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 859, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Janine Hansen, JANINEHANSEN. I am the state chairman of the Independent American Party. We oppose SB 452. I have had a concealed carry permit for over 25 years. As a woman, I feel it is critical for my personal protection and the protection of my family. Gaming establishments can already post a firearms prohibited sign and prohibit people from carrying a firearm. By expanding gun-free zones, this bill puts law-abiding citizens at risk. When we advertise to criminals that they need not fear that anyone will be able to defend themselves, we invite criminal activity. The Crime Prevention Research Center, founded by Dr. John Lott, found that 98% of mass shootings occurred in gun-free zones between 1950 and 2016. And according to a 2007 study published by the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, the more guns a nation has, the less criminal activity. Where firearms are most dense, violent crime rates are lowest. And where guns are least dense, violent crime rates are the highest, said the Harvard study. This explains why many shootings take place in gun-free zones, like schools and movie theaters, rather than in police stations and gun clubs. In the Nevada Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, it states, all men are by nature free and equal and have inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty. And in Article 1, Section 11 of the Nevada Constitution, it states, every citizen has the right to keep and bear arms for security and defense. This bill violates our inalienable right to keep and bear arms, and it makes us subject to arbitrary enforcement. We oppose SB 452. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 373. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Bob Russo, B-O-B-R-U-S-S-O, and I strongly oppose SB 452. This bill clearly tolerates law-abiding concealed carry permit holders, excuse me, who, as Senator Hansen asserted, are not the problem or not the people committing gun violence. I personally believe that it would be in the best interest of casinos to allow permit holders to conceal carry on their properties. Statistically, crime rates drop when many in the citizenry are known to be armed. This happened to Detroit in 2014 under Police Chief James Craig, who encouraged gun ownership for the citizens in his jurisdiction. There are many cases in which responsible gun owners have prevented mass shootings from occurring. A 2009 workplace shooting in Houston, Texas, was halted by two co-workers who carried concealed handguns. A 2012 church shooting in Aurora, Colorado, was stopped by a member of the congregation carrying a gun. How many more lives would have been lost in the above situations had the assailants not been confronted by those carrying and trained in the use of a firearm? Police and security are not always available. Congressman Thomas Massey shared a story about a former staff member who watched as her husband was killed in front of her because she followed gun control laws and her assailant did not. She left her concealed carry weapon in her car because it was a gun-free zone. It is a sign that no criminals pay attention to. Sadly, this bill does target law-abiding concealed carry permit holders, some who may mistakenly carry a handgun into a casino and not the criminal who ignores gun control laws. Lastly, the lack of clarity on the procedures the public must follow could be an unnecessary source of conflict and justifies the bill's opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. And a brief reminder for those that have recently joined or missed previous prompts, we are currently on opposition testimony for Senate Bill 452. If you'd like to provide opposition testimony at this time, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 899. Please press star 6 to unmute yourself. Thank you, caller. Then slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hello, my name is Lena Radney, Lynnarady. I represent More Than a Hashtag, which is a local protest group here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm in opposition of this bill because, as we know from the Jorge Gomez case on June 1st, 2020, LVMPD is not equipped or trained to interact with the public when they're open carrying or concealed carrying. They recklessly murdered Jorge Gomez on June 1st, 2020, and DA Stu Wolfson decided not to indict the officers. If you guys allow this bill to pass, this will happen on casino premises. What that'll do for our economy, because Black lives only matter when it affects the economy, is people are going to stop coming to Vegas. They're going to know Vegas is not safe. people are dying, people are being killed and murdered, and as everybody echoed before, this affects law-abiding citizens as well. That's all, and that's it.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 304. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hi, my name is Jim DeGraffenreid, DeGraffenreid. I am the National Committee Man for the Nevada Republican Party, and I testified against this bill when it was AB 286, and it was considered by the committees and rejected. This language was all taken out of the bill. We object to taking valuable legislative time to review issues that have already been debated and settled in this session. It is telling that the ACLU, Plan Nevada, law enforcement, and the NRA are all united in opposition, and I second all of the excellent testimony that was given earlier, particularly by the ACLU. This bill is supported by outside groups who are funded with millions of dollars from Michael Bloomberg. It is not supported by Nevadans. If you check the website, you'll find that the original bill has 3,342 opinions against, with only 524 Nevadans in favor. If MGM wants this bill, it may be that a municipal ordinance would be more appropriate rather than infringing on the rights of all Nevadans statewide. We urge these committees to please oppose SB 452 and get on with more important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 318. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa DeGraffenreid, DeGraffenreid, and I am speaking for myself as a Nevadan. I have worked in security at a major casino owner in Nevada, and I have never had any problems with anyone that I've gone to and asked to comply with my request to leave the premises to secure their weapon and secure it themselves in their automobile in the back of their room or house. The first time it was a CCW holder, but because of our protocol and our rules on the property not to have a firearm, I explained that it needed to be taken off property, and they were a bit perturbed by it, but complied, went back, took their firearm back to wherever, and came back afterward. So I'm finding it very difficult that MGM is trying to and seems to be bringing potential laws for problems that are not a major problem, and so I just would wish that you all would vote no to SB 452. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 815. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Thank you for taking my call. This is James Carr, JamesCarr. I think it's terrible public policy to attach criminal penalties to violations of private sector rules or regulations. And I think it's more terrible policy to omit an unequivocal requirement for an oral warning, not just to involve law enforcement, but as an element of the crime. I also think it's important for everyone to notice that I'm intentionally using the word oral instead of verbal because they had different meanings. Today, we've heard much testimony regarding how casinos and the security may handle this legislation. What we've not heard is how this legislation may be handled by law enforcement in a proactive manner. We can't forget that law enforcement will not only be acting on this legislation in the form of calls for service, but also in the form of officer-initiated stops. SB 452 will provide gang units and saturation patrols with another excuse to stop people, especially young black males in the Las Vegas Strip. And this activity is something the legislature should be seeking to limit, not increase. Without a requirement for an oral warning, police may have reasonable suspicion to detain people within the property boundaries, not necessarily in the buildings or structures of a covered premises, if there are indications of the possession of a firearm, whether real, perceived, or fabricated. This will not necessarily involve people who are actually possessing a firearm, but people who police officers believe or pretend to believe are possessing a firearm within the property bounds. So we should expect to see stop and frisk activity that results not only from casino calls for service, but more often from the standard practice of proactive policing, often seen in urban areas. Downstream of this, we can expect undesirable use of force events, and I therefore urge the committee to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 860. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Yes, thank you. My name is Mike Hawkins, Hawkins, and I am in responding to this bill in opposition. I'm heavily against any other attempts to curtail our concealed carry rights. Also, I've been in many casinos where they've had calls for security that were met not by one individual, but by more than one when they have a potential problem. Usually the security is hired as 6'2" or 4" in that range, and there's 3 or 4 of them. That prevents usually anything going wrong. I've never been around anybody that's had these guns problems. Mostly it's drunks. The only times I've heard of guns going off in casinos has been when gangs have come in with guns illegally and had shootouts like they did down in Carson City and in Reno. I'm 100% gun owner. I am 100% against giving this casino a free pass on liability for having these problems in their casino. They should not be calling the police. They should have armed security in their casino. They don't have to have everyone armed because they have a system that calls their people to a certain area when they need the help. Again, I'm opposed to this bill, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 664. Please press *6 to unmute yourself. Thank you, caller, and slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
My name is Joel Friedman, JoelFriedman. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my fellow gun owners. I believe that this legislature needs to understand. I live in Henderson, Nevada. I'm 73 and a half years old and a documented certified handicapped person. I believe that this legislature has two choices concerning this bill. The first one is to simply vote it down, eliminate it, or postpone it and have it come back at the next session. The bill was poorly written and it cannot be fixed in the 2 weeks for 172 entities. I also find it extremely upsetting that while off-duty law enforcement officers are not in an exclusion, that there is no exclusion for people with active concealed carry permits. The people that have a permit have been vetted by the government as law-abiding citizens, and they have taken tests to prove their ability to use a firearm properly. It is a process that takes time necessary to confirm these people should be allowed to carry a concealed firearm. These people are people that comply with the law and have done everything possible to be able to protect themselves while complying with the law. At this point is a bill written by a person wishing to protect themselves, gets one slap on the wrist, and then becomes a prohibited person and loses the right of concealed carry, as well as possibly ownership of all their firearms, as well as possible fines or jail time. for exercising the right of self-defense. As stated earlier, I'm incapable of running away, and I'm a little old for physical fighting.
You've reached 2 minutes. If you could please wrap up.
Okay. I believe that there is nothing in the language that allows for the liability of the owners. There is a problem in exiting. There could be a danger in trying to get to your car or an Uber or
All
seeking
right.
public transit.
You've exceeded 2 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 105. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Lynn Chapman. I'm the State Vice President of Nevada Families for Freedom, LYNNCHAPMAN. We oppose SB 452. Our borders are wide open, and who has come into our country? Do we even know? No, we do not. Do we know what weapons they may be bringing with them? No, we do not. I heard on the news May 10th that in 1 month's time, over 6,000 known terrorists, rapists, child molesters, and murderers from around the world have now been apprehended at our border, and those were the ones that they caught. I wonder how many were not caught and what type of weapons they may have brought with them. What about gangs in our country, and what about drug cartels? Both are very heavily armed and usually outgun our own police. But once again, you keep going after the law-abiding citizens with more laws that do nothing but disarm them. Who were the people who did the shootings at the Las Vegas Strip? CCW holders? Of course not. How many more laws targeting law-abiding citizens will be presented that you think criminals will start to follow? You need to focus on the lawbreakers, the terrorists, the criminals, the gangs, and the drug cartels, and stop taking law-abiding citizens' right to defend themselves and their families away. More laws like this targeting legal gun owners is not the answer. Please oppose SB 452. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 591. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. It may begin.
Hi there. My name is Jamie Shepler. That's JAIMEE SHEPLER. I did not hear one example of a shooting by a person who took the CCW classes and educated themselves to obtain a CCW to protect their own lives. Violent crime went up last year due to the encouragement of BLM and Antifa rallies across the nation, which sparked violence in every situation. As a lawful CCW holder, I will not be coming to any gun show if I am unable to conceal carry in the casinos, restaurants, etc., outside of the gun show. It seems the issue here is the actual presence of firearms, not the presence of violent people who want to do harm, which should be the real problem. If this bill is not intended to go after people making an honest mistake, what process is in place to differentiate between people making an honest mistake and those who are not? If I was traveling from out of town and had my CCW, by walking into the casino to ask an employee who to talk to, am I not already a criminal by this law? And how do I make sure that in this instance, I'm going to get both a prompt response and permission to carry? I heard some say that in some instances, people may be given a verbal warning, and in other instances, they would not. This is unfair and inconsistent treatment. Section 18 of Article 1 says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, and effects against unreasonable seizures and searches shall not be violated. SB 452 is in direct contradiction to several sections, some already stated, of the Nevada Constitution. The fact is, the majority of people are good, lawful, responsible gun owners who do not want these laws. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 846. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hello, my name is Adrian Lowry, ADRIAN LOWRY, and I oppose SB 452. I'm incredulous, and I hope everyone is incredulous at the claim that there's no racial discrimination in the casinos. There's no way that this bill will be equally used against white customers and black and brown customers. Everyone in this room knows that is true, and that they're claiming this further undermines the idea that they should be given this power. They claim there will be training required, like implicit bias training. Are we just going to pretend that these trainings are effective? These trainings are not effective, so at least acknowledge that. It's a way to check off the box. It's more compliance theater. Most studies have shown that implicit bias training does not change the behavior of employees. Don't say racial discrimination is not a problem because there is training. It is not true, and it is insulting to keep telling us that training addresses racial discrimination. These people are not stupid. They already know when they go into the training what the message is going to be, and they already know that they disagree with that message, but they will go along with it to get through compliance. You're asking us to believe that they just don't know what is considered racist or discriminatory. They're not a blank slate. They already know, and they already disagree. You must not pass this bill because it will increase and perpetuate violence against communities of color. You need to reframe your approach because it does not reduce crime when you take a father or a mother out of the lives of their children by locking them up and preventing that family from accessing resources that other families have available. We must not expand the power of stop and frisk to private organizations. It is dangerous, destructive, and wrong. If it takes one life away due to a misunderstanding or racial stereotyping, that is too much. This will not make people safer. It will make people less safe. This committee needs to make a decision. Do you actually want to reduce crime, or do you just want to continue the destructive approach of collective punishment on non-white communities? Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 080. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman, representing Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. NACJ opposes SB 452. We're not here today because we're opposed to the concept of gun control on a substantive level. Instead, we share the concerns discussed by the ACLU, Ms. Birchie, Ms. Saunders, and many of the other people who testified, including the caller just before me. Gun violence is a real systemic problem, but we should be looking for real systemic solutions. SB 452 is a Band-Aid that will not do anything to meaningfully address the threat of gun violence, but will only increase the racial and economic disparities that are already present in our criminal justice system. We therefore oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 766. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hi, my name is Matthew Wilkie, MATTHEWWILKIE. I live in Assembly District 40. Not many things nowadays get bipartisan support, and this has gotten widespread bipartisan opposition. I do want to echo the callers before me with everything that they've said, along with I agree with Senator Hansen and Assemblyman O'Neill that this will not prevent crime. This will not be able to differentiate between the bad actors and those law-abiding, card-holding citizens. Assemblywoman Krasner and Assemblywoman Summers-Armstrong bring up excellent points that there's little to no access to get this information and how to get and the ability to obtain authorization if you're trying to do so. Senator Cannizzaro brought up the point that this is a de-escalation bill and a de-escalation tactic, which is interesting because there has been bills brought forth this session, one which I can think of specifically from Summer Armstrong herself, which received no support from her or the chair. So it makes you wonder, is this bill about de-escalation or what this is about? Thank you so much for your time, and I urge your opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 771. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Leslie Turner, LESLIETURNER. I'm calling in opposition to SB 452, and I'm just urging everyone on this committee to please vote no and vote this down. I think that it's, I can keep my testimony short because I feel like many people have said already what I plan to say. And I think the broad coalition of opposition to this bill is very telling. So I guess my question then is, are you going to listen to the will of the people? Because the people have come out abundantly clear that we do not want this bill. We do not want new ways to criminalize people on the strip. And I don't understand why so much time, energy, there was an hour offered for opposition, support testimony. And, I've been calling in all session. It's my first time seeing an hour allotted for testimony and support. So, again, why is so much time and energy being put into a bill to criminalize people on the strip for open carrying when many of those folks have licenses and there is no way to differentiate who has a license and who doesn't? So, and especially given the nature of everything that's happened over the last year and a half with people in the streets actively protesting against police violence, being further criminalized. And so, it's just a way to have more people have interactions with police when it's not necessary. So MGM, they have plenty of money. They can hire armed security to handle the situation in a way that fits into their policies, but codifying policies for the MGM that all Nevadans now have to follow and be impacted by is not good public policy. And I just urge everyone present, please vote no and please vote this down. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And with that, Chair Scheibel, there are no more callers to provide opposition testimony at this time.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Kyle. So I just want to clarify again for the record, everybody who called in to testify in opposition has been given the opportunity to testify. And with that, we will move on
Chair, that is correct.
Oh, thank you. And so with that, we'll move on to neutral testimony. Is there anybody present to give neutral testimony? I am not seeing anybody coming to the table, so we will go to the phone lines, please, Mr. Kyle.
Thank you so much, Chair. To testify in the neutral standing on Senate Bill 452, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in the neutral position on Senate Bill 452, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Joint Committee. My name is Chuck Callaway, Callaway, representing the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. We are neutral on this bill. We certainly support the Second Amendment and the ability of law-abiding citizens to carry their firearms for protection. And likewise, we also support the rights of business owners to prohibit firearms on their property. Obviously, it is the decision of you, the legislative body, to determine if carrying a firearm on someone's property against their wishes warrants a criminal penalty. In regards to some of the questions that were asked for law enforcement, I'd like to quickly clarify. One question that was raised regarded trespassing and response by law enforcement. Obviously, we prioritize calls, and depending on the time of day and what's occurring out there, trespassing in and of itself may be a low priority call. Over the last 30 days, we had 605 trespassing calls valley-wide and 289 trespassing calls on the Strip. 74 of those calls were closed out with no response, and that could be a result of several reasons. Either the caller called back and canceled our response, or a supervisor handled the call over the phone with no response. That means 88% of trespass calls that were called in, we responded to. Also, I was asked to provide a number of gun incidents or firearm incidents over the last 30 days on the Strip. That number was 25. I was asked to clarify that number and to put it into perspective. Those numbers include not only assaults or disturbances, in one case a homicide, 2 robberies, and a domestic violence involving a firearm, but it also included other instances such as a check the welfare where a firearm was involved, a vehicle that was stolen with a firearm in it, and found property calls where a firearm was lost or found. So it does run the range of various types of calls. And with that, Chair, I appreciate it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 937. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Right. Thank you. My name is Michael Finley. For the record, we were actually supposed to be in opposition as opposed to neutral. I apologize about the technical difficulties on that. Again, for the record, my name is Michael Finley. I'm with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We run SHOT Show in Las Vegas. We have major concerns with the bill. We testified in opposition when it was in the Assembly, and we'd like to testify in opposition again on this. Our main concern is, while we appreciate being exempted from the provisions within the bill, we do have concerns about how this would affect our show in practice and how it would affect our members who do attend SHOT Show. In addition to that, we do think that the policies that are put in place need to be spelled out more, and there needs to be more certainty on the front end, so our law-abiding attendees as well as guests know exactly what we can and cannot do prior to coming to Las Vegas when we bring about 80,000 people to Clark County. With that, I won't take up any more time, and I would urge the committee for a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 490. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Forgive me, may I give opposition testimony? Technical issues, I could not chime in.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. I apologize. My name is Cyrus Hojati, C-Y-R-U-S, H-O-J-J-A-T-Y. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Here's the heart of the issue. People are really not talking about what's truly causing the increase in violence in society, which is fatherless homes and the growing gap between the rich and the poor. I have a lot of suspicions about this bill because it's being shoved through the last minute. And I haven't also been told about where similar bills has worked anywhere in this country or around the world. The fact that casinos and culinary union is pushing this bill further proves my main concern of this state, which is how this political machine really works, total conflicts of interest. And I just want to respond to the culinary union. I don't think they're a legitimate union. And you also have to understand that they talk about how the shutdowns harmed their jobs. Remember, they were the major factor in the elections and what caused the outcomes to put people in power.
All right. As I mentioned
suspicious.
previously, testimony needs to be limited to the policy. If you have anything else to say about the policy, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize. I was just trying to respond. And other than that, I feel that this is going to create more concerns regarding casino security. A lot of people have been visiting the hotels. I've heard a lot of reports that 86 have been banned for useless reason. I believe this will further intensify this kind of thing. And as far as I know, it's just a lot of people have been going there with fear, and this is just going to add insult to injury. So other than that, at least what you can do is you can make some changes to it. Thank you so much. I apologize for going a little off topic, and best of luck to everybody.
Thank you, caller. And with that, Chair Scheibel, there are no more callers to provide neutral testimony at this time.
All right. So we have taken testimony from everybody in the room and everybody who called in all three positions, which means that we are concluding testimony now. And I will invite the sponsors of the bill back to the table to give some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Chair Scheibel, and of course, Chair Yeager, Fabian Donate for the record. Well, happy Saturday, I guess, with these testimonies. First off, I want to make my closing remarks detail on the positive impact that we can create today by passing this bill. Given the questions and comments that were given throughout today, I think it's safe, for me at least, to commit to fixing the education portion of this bill and addressing the concerns with off-duty officers and limiting, of course, the scope of covered premise. I think that was something that Ms. Molina had detailed. So thank you all for bringing those comments forward. As a person of color, I can attest to the racial discrimination that we experience on a daily basis. I disagree with the sentiment that enacting this policy will target responsible gun owners negatively. It's a tool for prevention, which cannot be left behind in this conversation. In fact, this supports responsible gun owners who will collaborate with the institutions, particularly with MGM and other entities similar to that. I ask the committee members today to think about the Black and Latino workers and the emotional trauma that they already carry. People like my dad, my grandma, my tios, my tias, that work endlessly to service our state, and that's who we are protecting today. The choice today is between preventing gun violence and not, but we cannot let our disagreements today be an excuse for our inaction. SB 452 is a public health framework that can support the end to this epidemic. We must recognize the value of public-private partnerships that are necessary beyond this framework and this legislation to carry out the good work of this mission. In public health, we lead with the belief that everyone deserves the right to live a long and fulfilling life. And the first step to accomplish that is to prevent violence, gun violence. That's what's at stake today. So again, I urge my colleagues their support and to, of course, bring your ideas so that we can address any of them. And I'll turn it back to Majority Leader Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel, Chair Yeager, and members of the committee for what I think is an important conversation to make sure that we're answering and asking the kinds of questions that we've heard today. And thanks for everyone who has come up and I think given some interesting arguments in opposition. I think that Senator Doñate said it best. This is about gun violence, and it's as simple as that. Either we believe that this body, and we have in the past, at least in as much as I have been here, can take steps to ensure that gun violence is not something that has to plague our society unabashedly in a way that puts people at risk, or we don't. But I mean, we have taken steps, even in my time here, to say that we don't believe that libraries are a place where people should carry guns. And a lot of the opposition that we heard in those situations was that this would just target law-abiding citizens who would be unfairly kept from exercising their Second Amendment rights. Yet there is a decision there that that's a place where the possession of a firearm is not appropriate. We've also made policy decisions not to take steps to arm teachers to ensure that our schools are not a place where guns may be possessed, and that our children can learn safely, because we believe that that is a place where people deserve to be safe. This bill is no different than that. Saying that we don't allow firearms in libraries is not an end run around to impose what I do not agree with to be an improper stop and frisk policy that we've seen in other places. That was not what that bill was intended to do. That was never a conversation that we had on that. Yet today we're asking to do the same thing for certain private entities that are asking to keep their workers and the people who visit there safe. And somehow this is turning into a conversation that this will open up the floodgates to being an improper stop and frisk situation, which is just simply not the case. If that's not what's happening in our schools and in our libraries, if it's not what's happening when we say you can't bring a firearm into a concert or into a show or into this building, then that is not what this bill is, one, designed to do, nor is that the effect. We have not made a decision to do that. We've made a decision to say that people deserve to be safe in their workplace and that our patrons deserve to be safe inside of those buildings. I also think that it is interesting to hear that the solution may be, in some respects, to simply arm a security force and allow for them to to implement the same policy and that somehow that solves the issue, when we are taking appropriate steps to say that what we ought to be doing is to be putting our faith into law enforcement, that we can impose policies to ensure that there's implicit bias training, that we have early indicators of individuals who may not be able to properly conduct that job, but that we also believe that they can help keep our community safe. And in partnership with places like the MGM, who has testified here multiple times, that they currently have a policy of not allowing firearms on their property and that they give verbal warnings. But when those verbal warnings are insufficient and someone who has a firearm is saying, I am not going to leave your property, they are at a loss of what to do. And when coupled with the fact that there are incidences of gun violence that are escalating to, as I believe Mr. Calloway mentioned, robberies, domestic violences with firearms, assaults. These are the kinds of incidences that we're trying to prevent from happening in the first place, so that law enforcement is not responding to a robbery or a domestic violence situation with a firearm, but that they're responding to say, hey, look, you have a firearm, you're not supposed to be here, that's against the law, and we're gonna help you leave. The same penalties exist if you show up to a library with a firearm and they ask you to leave and they call the police. The same policies exist if you show up to a school and say, I have a firearm, and you refuse to leave. I don't think we're asking for anything different here. There are also some groups who oppose this, who have opposed every use of force bill that has been discussed, who have opposed implicit bias training, who have opposed early warning detection systems to ensure that we can have faith in our law enforcement community to properly enforce laws in a way that is not unfairly targeting Black and brown communities or people of color or anyone else unless they are breaking the law. Yet today, we are opposed to this because of the same reasons that potentially it may result in racial profiling. I think we can have the faith that we can say we can properly enforce the law without crossing those lines, that we are taking other steps in this building to do so, but that we are also taking gun violence seriously. And that is all this bill is about. That's it. And I find the data that there is ongoing gun violence in some of our tourism properties, and I understand that this definition, and I think everyone is happy to work on the definition to make sure that it is narrowly tailored, so it's addressing the issue that we are trying to address. I think that was the intention of making it a non-restricted gaming license definition. That we're open to doing that to make sure that that's the case. But where you have in 30 days 25 incidences involving the use of a firearm, and several of those involving some of the more serious crimes that can be committed, a homicide, robberies, domestic violence with use of a weapon, assault with a deadly weapon, that there has got to be at some point the impetus to make a change and to say that we're gonna allow another place where before we get into those situations, we can also work with law enforcement to ensure the safety of the people who are in our community. That is it. That is all this bill is about. And if we are not seeing those same effects in schools, libraries, this building, courthouses, other venues where we have prohibited people from possessing firearms, then I am just at a loss of how this is any different than trying to address the very specific problems that are currently occurring in our communities and where we have an opportunity to help address that. I appreciate the committee taking the time on a Saturday after what was a long night here last night. And I know that everyone has done a lot of really good work to not only ask the right questions, but to hopefully that we have provided some answers. And I just appreciate everyone's diligence and time this morning. Thank you, Chair Scheibel and Chair Yeager.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader Cannizzaro, Senator Doñate, and everybody else who came and participated in this hearing and this robust discussion. I appreciate your presentation and your attention to this issue, and I, again, appreciate everybody's participation. At this point in time, I will ask Chair Yeager if he has any comments before I officially close the hearing.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. I just want to thank you for inviting us this morning to participate in the hearing. Thank you, Assembly members, for your diligence and your attention this morning. Greatly appreciate it. And just so you all know, if you didn't read already, our next regularly scheduled meeting will be Tuesday at 10 o'clock, where we'll be hearing one bill. So we will see you then, and we hope you have a great weekend.
All right, and with that, I will officially close the hearing on SB 452. We are going to go into a recess. At the end of that recess, members of the Assembly are welcome to join us, but we will be doing a Senate work session, so you won't be able to vote. I imagine you have better things to do on a Saturday. But for the members of the Senate committee, we will be coming back into this room at the call of the chair. So please stay close.
Madam Chair, any idea on time frame?
I'm thinking between about 30 minutes.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, we are in recess.